And we are live in 5, 4, 3.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 27th, 2014 meeting of the North Idaho College Board of Trustees. As we begin all meetings, would you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a quorum, and I don't know that we have any guests to introduce other than those that are on the agenda tonight. I don't know if anybody signed up for public comment. No sign up for public comment. So I'm going to ask if the board has reviewed the minutes and if there are any modifications, additions, or corrections. Hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. There being no public comment, we're moving on to celebrating success. I'm going to make a comment before we start out. You'll see in the agenda that we've placed some time parameters behind each of these items. There have been a number of people over a number of months who have commented on sometimes the length of our proceedings here. And we're going to try and put some kind of controls on that to see if we can't hold down the overall time of the meeting. These times that are on here are suggested. Nobody's going to go up with a hook and pull you down and interrupt your presentation. But I would hope that you would try to live within those time limits so that we can move this meeting along. And our first attempt at that is celebrating success, the faculty sabbatical report. And that is Michael?
On my agenda, does Tim have two extra agenda? Did I do mine with you? Okay.
Do you want to see it? I need it.
No. Share.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Chairman Howard, members of the board, President Dunlap, administrators, constituent leaders, and audience members. Leader Burns asked me to come here tonight to speak about my sabbatical you granted me 1 year ago for the fall of 2013. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that time, and I wanted to thank the board for their support for the sabbatical process. Tonight, I would like to talk briefly about the value of sabbaticals, introduce what I do in art and at NIC, and then mainly show and tell more about what I learned during the sabbatical and the impact it has had and will continue to have on my students. To make sure that I stay within the 7-minute time frame, I prepared a slideshow, but I would be happy to answer questions afterward if you think it's necessary. In addition, if you would like a little more detail, I did write a report to LEDA last winter, and I have links and related resources and videos if you'd like to see those, so I can get those to you if you'd like that. So, NIC faculty is a devoted group of people. You're teachers and professionals who work hard and stay connected to our fields and to practice to what we teach by researching, reading, going to conferences, and maintaining relationships with faculty and professionals at other institutions and in the community. But because NIC is a community college, a full 5-class load each semester with preparation, evaluation, and relationships with students, along with advising and committee work, is our full-time commitment. As a result, I, like other faculty, spend time when I'm not teaching, engaged in professional development to maintain a professional edge and to be effective in the classroom, which in my case happens to be making art whenever and however I can. Thankfully, the sabbatical last fall gave me the opportunity to study and pursue projects in a sustained way. The renewed energy from teaching, from taking time for deep professional development feeds directly into my interactions with students. Such time fills the well for creative thinking and becomes inspiration for dynamic teaching. Briefly, my own art-making process is wide-ranging. I began as a cartoonist and as an illustrator in Seattle. I moved into painting and then into sculpture. Currently, I draw in charcoal, I paint in mixed media, and I create sculptures in wood and steel, like that one. You may undoubtedly recognize the sculpture of Trilogy on the roundabout here in campus. You can imagine the process of creating and fabricating that sculpture was intense and quite rewarding, occurring mostly over one summer 2 months ago. The consistent work as an artist also connects me to students who know that I practice what I teach. As an instructor, I have a full load of classes each semester, including art history, illustration, drawing, 2- and 3-dimensional design, and sculpture. This semester we have 534 students in art classes with 61 declared majors. In summary, my sabbatical provided me with the time to study processes and materials, mostly in casting and working with glass, to continue conversations with the University of Idaho about the opportunities for students here and in Coeur d'Alene, to create public art proposals for the city of Coeur d'Alene, for which I was a finalist, to give presentation to the Coeur d'Alene's Arts Commission on creating public art, to attend an international sculpture conference and iron pour workshop, to write grants to the Idaho Arts Commission and NIC Foundation, both of which were granted, to design the sculpture park on the grounds of the community garden for the purpose of providing space for the public exhibition of NIC's students' art, and to work with the Trades and Industry Division to help find industrial workspace for sculpture students. Because of our limited time tonight, I'm going to highlight just 2 of these accomplishments. I would like to focus briefly on the iron pour and the new art and sculpture park in the Gathering Gardens. Shortly after being granted the sabbatical in 2013, I wrote a proposal for the International Sculpture Society to participate in a major new iron pour at their annual conference, and I was selected along with 10 other artists from around the world. Under the direction of the head of the sculpture department at Alfred University in New York, we created sand molds, fired up furnaces, poured iron, and released our sculptures. It was an exciting experience and very rewarding. Although this process would be too involved to recreate here at NIC, I have envisioned a way to build small aluminum furnaces that would teach students the same process. I'm hoping that in the future I can find space to do that here on campus and funding for tools and materials to make that process happen. Another highlight was the community garden, the new sculpture garden, the new sculpture and art garden on the new Gathering garden space on campus. During my sabbatical, I met with the garden's leadership to draw up a plan. I wrote a grant to the NIC Foundation, which was gracious enough to provide funding. When I returned in the spring, the process of creating the space began in earnest. And a few students in my sculpture class then welded sculptures to display early in the new space. Continuing the process this semester, since everything is set up, my classes will make sculptures for all the other colorful poles that are now part of that space. The art department also envisions opportunities for displaying 2-dimensional work and for community partnerships. However, integral to those efforts is the space in which students have to make their work. One of the main goals for my sabbatical was to develop an industrial art space on campus, since much of our art wing has been absorbed by classroom and is upstairs in Boswell Hall, where using tools and making large projects becomes a challenge. Since we have such shortage of space, and since they are generous people, Doug Anderson, Dave McCrae, Shane Stockman, and Cal DeHaas in Trades and Industry have been gracious enough to allow us to work in their welding and carpentry shops. My students and I are very grateful for this. However, we also hope that in the future we may eventually find more options on campus for a dedicated art industrial space. The results of all this effort is that students are able to display their art in public, which raises the bar for their work and causes them to feel a great sense of accomplishment. I have always made an effort to get students' work out across campus and into the community, whether it's in the large cardboard projects that appear around campus in the spring semester, the gargoyles in the library, which are now featured in the new collectible cards, or the work they have done with the Children from Art on the Edge program. Just as major works of public art help to define communities' identity, giving students the opportunity to show the products of their imaginations and hard work helps inspire the NIC community. My goal as a teacher is to guide students to be able to think creatively and visually, to use clear, critical thinking when generating original ideas, to choose and use wide range of materials and tools, to develop the skills to make what they see in their minds come alive, and to exhibit their work, all of which leads them to make their learning real. The art making process, which is, whether it's 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, whether using computers or paintbrushes or welding equipment, requires students to think, to create, and to exhibit their work. In a visual world, these skills are incredibly valuable, whether they become designers, architects, public artists, museum directors, product designers, marketing professionals, set designers, illustrators, teachers. Our world needs more people who are trained to think visually and to be able to problem solve creatively. And finally, the art department strives to give students both intellectual and practical skills. It's important to know that being a student of art isn't just about expressing your feelings. It is also very much about critical thinking and problem solving, the very real physical and intellectual labor of making manifest something that didn't exist before. They learn both traditional art-making processes and practical tools. I often remind my students they are inventors as well as artists. Students must understand the dynamics of visual aesthetics and principles of design and put them to use in the creation of their work. Most importantly, we want students to feel the confidence to pursue their ideas, and we want them to know that their talents and skills are valued. This semester of work on sabbatical will have a lasting value both to me and to my students. And I thank you very much for the time to have done that.
Michael, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Judy?
Well, I think we're all excited by it. Thank you for sharing. It does help us see what you've been doing. And you commented it was enriching to the students, but also to our campus and our community to have those art pieces around. So it's what a community college does, and that's share in the community. And I've enjoyed some of your art. Today I saw the one in the Gathering Garden, but it was only as I was going around the roundabout. So I want to go back and look at it again more carefully when I'm not driving. But I had not seen it before, so I was glad to see that there.
Yeah, hopefully they're not too much of a distraction. I'm always concerned about the roundabout thing, so yeah, appreciate that.
Any other comments? Christy?
Well, this board has always believed strongly in professional development and what that means in the classroom when we encourage our instructors to apply for sabbaticals and come back and, like you said, re-energize. And so it's so fun to watch what you've done and put together. And you're such a well-known artist, and you really are. Who doesn't know him?
Tell my mother that, please. I'd like to know that.
And so it's so great to have your art, not only in this city, but in other cities. And so congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Judy?
I was just thinking one of the other pieces I've always enjoyed, and if I have it correctly, is the one in the library that is called Hands.
Hands of Humanity, yes.
And that's one I believe you did years ago?
Yeah, we did that with the Art on the Edge students years ago. We partnered up my three-dimensional design class with the students from the Art on the Edge program, the St. Vincent de Paul arts program. And the hands that you see are cast from my students' hands and then from the children's hands. And that's in celebration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so that's what it is.
When you say Art on the Edge, then you're saying that program deals with folks outside the community college?
Yeah, that's for children, at-risk children and kids that don't have access to arts programs. And so it's in conjunction with the St. Vincent de Paul program. And they try to get people in there to teach programs, do workshops and that kind of a thing. And so it was really nice when we did do that project. We had an opening once it was up and invited the family members to come. And it was a terrific thing because a lot of those kids had never been on a campus before. They'd never been on a college campus before. And oddly, I have seen some of those students now on campus. And so they've stopped by and said, remember I did that thing with you years ago. And so I think it has an impact when we can get students on the campus. And I think when they work creatively in this space that we all share, it makes them think and makes them realize that there are bigger dreams and broader dreams that maybe they can have in their own personal environment, their home environment. So, yeah.
So it really is community college.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very rewarding.
Michael, let me thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you also. I know trying to deliver a message in some kind of a time limit, it always makes the delivery difficult, and thank you very much for helping us move this along. I appreciate it, but more than that, we appreciate your work and your message. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
The next item on the agenda are the constituent reports. Asnick?
Does the timer
Richard?
begin when they get there to deliver or when they leave their seat?
Yeah, we're going to start putting time limits on the trustees' questions too, right? Richard, go ahead. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, thank you. Chairman Howard, Board of Trustees, and guests. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent ASNIC once again. I'm blessed and thankful to have that position, and to allow me to explain what ASNIC's been doing this last couple of months over the summer. So, the last 3 weeks we've been working on training the new ASNIC board and getting them ready for this new year at NIC. In addition to our training this week, we have the week of welcome, and yesterday was our day of welcome. So at the day of welcome, ASNIC supplied t-shirts, information on how to get involved. We also gave out planners, and in an effort to try to get as many students on the Cardinal Connect system, we supplied, bless you, we supplied tumblers to the
That
students.
won't count on your time, don't worry.
I appreciate that.
Sorry, Richard.
No worries, no worries. We gave them tumblers to the students that showed us that they received a text through the Cardinal Connect system. So kind of a little bit of a joint effort there, which is really awesome. ASNIC Student Events first program is tomorrow at 7:30. Everybody's welcome to come. It's open to the public. It's in the Lake Coeur d'Alene room. We will have a stand-up comedian named Erin Jackson. I guess she was really awesome a couple years ago. She placed third in the last comic standing, so it should be a lot of fun. ASNIC is pleased to see the progress of the Student Recreation Center Advisory Board and its engagement with the campus and community. I believe John Totten and the rest of the board have made a wonderful commitment to seeing the project through, and I'm pretty excited about that as well. So this is the end of my report. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than glad to answer them for you.
Any questions, Richard?
I'm free.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the report.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next report is from Staff Assembly. Carol?
Good evening, Chairman Howard, trustees, President Dunlap, and guests. Staff Assembly kicked off our year by having our annual picnic in July, and I'd like to thank NIC Food Services for providing some delicious hamburgers to us, and Jessica Bennett opened up the zip line to us. We also had live entertainment provided by NIC karaoke singers. And unfortunately, President Dunlap was out of town and unable to make it, but you certainly are welcome to join us next year for karaoke and hamburgers.
You don't want to hear me sing.
We had our first regular staff assembly meeting on August 14th with a few guest speakers. Our wrestling coach, Pat Wickham, shared information about the We Care school supply drive and invited our participation in that. Andrea Wempner from Human Resources gave us an update on NIC's new Vitality Wellness program. And I'm currently working with our committee chairs to staff committee vacancies for the upcoming year. And that concludes my report, and thank you for the opportunity to update you on staff assembly.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
One quick one, if you're curious, that event that Pat spoke to you about, it went off tremendously well today in Riverstone. They were scheduled to go from 10 to 2, and by the time I showed up just to lend some support, that was just prior to 1 o'clock. They were done and gone. I mean, they were still there doing it, but stuff had been gone for a while. I mean, apparently they were stacked all the way around the corner and the block, and they went through everything they had and just within a couple hours. So it was very well attended, and it was a tremendous success.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
So anybody that supported that, thank you. They gave out, I think last year he said they raised about $2,500, and this year they raised about $4,000. So they hope to keep growing that each year.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much, Carol. Our next report is on the Faculty Assembly. Erin Davis.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, trustees, and President Dunlap. Well, we are 3 days into the fall semester. There's been a really great energy on campus. It feels good to be back. It's nice for faculty to be back in the classroom, meeting our students, and looking forward to all the new possibilities that a new school year brings us. While faculty did enjoy some time for rest and relaxation over the summer, many of us weren't involved with the business of the college, whether we were advising students at ORS, working on remediation reform, teaching summer classes, answering President Dunlap's call to man those phones in July and reach out to potential students, or serving on the GEM Council and working on Gen Ed realignment. Faculty Assembly welcomed the campus community back to the new school year last week by holding our annual ice cream social after the all-employee picnic. And I'm pleased to say that I don't think a drop of ice cream was left, so that went well. And it was a hot day too. Our executive committee will meet this Friday, and we'll have our first faculty assembly meeting on September 11th. This year, the faculty assembly will continue the process of reviewing the proposed changes to the college's policies and providing our senators with our feedback and input on those changes. I'll also be working with the executive committee right away on the process of figuring out committee assignments for full-time faculty for the school year. And although we haven't met yet, I anticipate some potential areas of interest to faculty that may come up might be the impact of those enrollment numbers on academic courses and programs, the ongoing work of general education realignment, the future maintenance of our salary schedule, the implementation of our new campus security procedures. But we're looking forward to a great year, and it feels good to be back. Any questions?
Any questions or comments? Christy?
Yeah, Erin, your comment about the phone calls and
Yes.
recruiting students. Quick story. I got invited into Wayne Longo's class last night, and it's such a privilege for a board member to get invited into a class and meet the students, and I really enjoy that. But what I always like to do is ask some of them, well, where are you from? And I'll tell you, your recruitment, students were as far away as Texas
Oh, wow.
and California, obviously Montana, Washington, and they were all choosing NIC. And that is directly attributed to strong recruitment and the wonderful offerings we have here. So what all of you did to impact that is tremendous, and I just want to thank you.
That's great. It was a good feeling, and I did personally reach out to out-of-state students on my list, and so that was fun. Okay. Any other questions?
Any comments or questions? Thank you very much, Aaron. Our report from the Senate. Chantel Black.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, Board of Trustees, President Dunlap, and all of our guests. As you can imagine, Senate has actually not met since the last time I saw you all. So I don't have any minutes to respond with, but I will let you know that we're ready in September to start hearing more policies and procedure revisions. We're expecting to be just as busy this next year as we were this last year, as the President's Cabinet continues to review all of our policies and procedures. So, any questions for me?
Questions or comments?
Right.
Thank you very much. Well, we're moving along at an impressive rate, but now we have the President's report.
Which has a self-imposed time limit of 10 minutes. Chairman Howard, trustees, and colleagues, we are off and running to the start of a great year. And so I have some announcements about our employees and folks that we're affiliated with. And the first announcement I want to make is in regard to the silent partner on this front desk, and that's Mark Lyons, our attorney. And for those of you who didn't get the Saturday paper, Mark Lyons was recognized as a super lawyer in Idaho. And that is for lawyers or attorneys who have attained a high degree of peer recognition and professional achievement. The annual selections are made using a rigorous multi-phased process that includes a statewide survey of lawyers, an independent research evaluation, and peer reviews by practice area. No more than 5% of the lawyers in Idaho are selected for this achievement. So Mark, congratulations. As you are well aware, we planned for up to a 10% reduction in enrollment this year based on national trends and what's happening in the economy. As of today, we are 7.9% reduced rather than the 10%, and we still have drops to go for non-payment, and that's factored into the numbers. And we won't know for a few days where we actually end up, but I think we're fairly positive that we are not going to be 10% or more reduced. And part of that, as was earlier mentioned, was we had a telethon that we called over 1,200 students who had partially filled out an application or a federal financial aid form. And I went out to the college community and asked for volunteers to man the phones to call these students, and we had 82 employees step forward, faculty, staff, administrators, that came in and made those calls, and it made a difference in our enrollment. And so I'd like to thank our faculty and staff and students and all of our employees for those exceptional efforts. And because that was successful, it's a strategy that we will probably implement in following years. Our student government with Jess Parker, who is one of our employees, has decided to establish a food bank for needy students. And so we went out, and each one of the vice presidents headed a team to collect foodstuffs, if you will, for the food pantry. And to incentivize it, the losing vice president would get dunked in the dunk tank, and the winning vice president would have the opportunity to dunk me in the dunk tank. And so as it turned out, Chris Martin, our new VP, was the winner, and so he had the opportunity to dunk me in the dunk tank, and I reminded him that he was on a one-year contract at that time. And then the individual who didn't fare as well was Graydon Stanley. And so he alleges that there was some conniving that went on to stack the deck against him. But Lita Burns was able to dunk Graydon in the dunk tank. But we have accumulated over 1,000 food items to initially stock that food bank for our needy students, and that will be an ongoing project. And I think it's another example of our employees stepping forward and trying to do the best they can for our students. Another example that was mentioned was the free school supplies for K through 12 students today over in Riverstone. And Pat Whitcomb started that last year. The volleyball team joined him this year. And was mentioned last year, they had $2,500 in donations and served 400 students. This year, they had $4,000 in donations and served 750 students. And so it has grown that much in 1 year. And the families that received those free school supplies were very grateful. And many of those were very, very needy. And it gave those students an opportunity to have new school supplies that they may not have otherwise had starting this new school year. And so another example of our faculty and staff being involved in the community, and probably one of the most important things out of that particular project was teaching civic responsibility to our athletic students. And Pat agrees with that as well. And so it was a great event. We have a monitoring visit from Department of Labor on the 10th through the 12th of September, and that's for an aerospace grant, and in essence, it's an audit to determine if we are in compliance and should we need to make adjustments or what kind of recommendations could be made. So we're looking forward to having them on campus to view our programs and provide any kind of suggestions or recommendations that they may have for us. I would also like to recognize Philippe Valet and one of his students whose logo design was selected by the city of Coeur d'Alene as the new Coeur d'Alene logo. And so, Philippe, that's a great honor for your student, and it really says a lot for the quality of your program. So good job on that. Let's see. I think we've covered about everything, unless anybody has any questions of me.
First question, Joe, would be is you referred to 7.9%
Yes.
starting, and then you referred to that after a period of time that you
Right.
feel comfortable with that. What is that normal time that you feel that you retain that, and what is the average deterioration rate? So if we go from 8% to 10% last year, we could maybe count on a 2% dropout rate. What is that historical, as well as when will we know?
Yep.
And then just on top of, I'd love for you to comment on Dr. Pam Otter that was here and the opening day session there. I thought it was moving and very enlightening what she talked about retention, and comment on her statement that the number one way to assure a student comes back is a teacher at the end of the year says, I hope to see you next year. Will I see you next year? And if the kid says yes, the retention rate is off the chart. So both of those, I'd appreciate a comment.
Okay, on the enrollment numbers, we will know on the 10th day our official enrollment, because that is after the drop deadline. And so that will be, Graydon, is that next week, roughly, the end of next week?
Yes, it is. End of next week, the following Monday after that is when we'll report those numbers, and there shouldn't be any changes for drop, add, or non-attendance. So our numbers will be pretty firm after that date.
Okay, and then Graydon, can you comment on the impact of the drop for non-payment, historically, how we think that will affect the current numbers that we have as of today?
Certainly, I'd be glad to. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and President Dunlap, we track that from year to year to see what kind of changes. It trends just about the same as we've been looking at numbers for the drop for non-payment, which occurs at the end of the evening tonight. It's been trending much the same as it has every year. We anticipate the numbers that you hear today, Trustee Nielsen, will not change much at all if it follows those trends as it has in the past, between students who have been on waiting lists that pick up additional classes, students who will have been dropped, come up with money, come up with methods to re-enroll the next couple days. It just neutralizes each other. So we don't anticipate that there'll be many changes in the statistics that you're hearing today.
A follow-up to that, addressed to Mr. Graydon. Graydon, is there, the foundations talked about at a foundation meeting, went to a record number of scholarships. Is there a reserve of scholarships for hardship cases where when you go to them and you say, man, I can't believe you're dropping for non-payment, whatever, and they just says, I was counting on my parents, they didn't come through, and then at that point that we make an application for that student?
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, Trustee Nielsen, I'm so glad you asked that question because, in fact, the foundation, first of all, repurposed some of their money this past year and said, we want to dedicate a large amount to the purposes of recruitment, retention, and completion, and they have given us a fairly substantial amount of unrestricted dollars to impact those areas. In fact, now we set aside at least $30,000 of that foundation money over the course of these next 2 weeks, this week and the next, and we've put the word out to staff in all those key areas that if we have students in situations where we're going to lose them as a result of not having the resources to be able to stay in school, live in the residence hall, support themselves, and we see that they're serious about their intentions here, the foundation has made those funds available. We have a process in place, and it's really the first time that I've seen that in my short history here happening, but it's great teamwork, great support from the foundation, and the staff is implementing that.
In response to the second part of your question, Mr. Nielsen, we had Pam Cox Otter, who was our guest speaker for Convocation, and what she talked about was what is trending in education and what is meaningful to students. In other words, are the systems that are designed by people of my age relevant to students of Richard's age? And the answer is absolutely not. And so we need to take another look at how we design those systems and the things that we do. And she was very pointed in her comments. She was very irreverent, which I really liked. And so I think she was very well received. But I'll give you 5 examples that relate to her comment about how do we influence students for retention and that high touch environment. In other words, how do we maintain a greater level of contact with the student? So first of all, we were funded this past year by the Albertsons Foundation for the Village Project. And the Village Project takes high-risk students, which traditionally only 1 in 20 would make it. We have a 75% success rate with those students now because we do intrusive advising, we do mentorship programs with them, and we try and maintain contact with those students. And so that project is funded for another 3 years, and we will use those best practices to expand to other parts of the college to try and create a better environment for students. A second area is in our web design. Our previous web page or our web site was designed for existing students and employees, and we made an attempt to be everything to everybody. And so Mark Browning's area has redesigned that website. It'll be released probably within a week. And the focus of that is on recruitment of new students. In other words, what do new students need to get them in the door and begin their success story here, rather than trying to be a general information site for everyone else. A third area that was mentioned tonight was that phone-a-thon. This was the first time that we had tried to keep that high-touch environment by personally calling over 1,200 individuals. And I'll give you one quick example. We had one lady who was back east on vacation. Alex Harris called her and said, I'm calling just to see if you're still interested in coming. And she said, I totally forgot about it. Now I'm afraid I'm going to get dropped and I won't be able to participate in college. And Alex said, no problem, we'll get you signed up right now. And she said, you have saved my life. And so Alex hung up the phone and shouted to the entire phone-a-thon room, I just saved somebody's life. Another area, and I briefly mentioned, was social media. And so Mark Browning's office as well is, but has put into effect things like Twitter, Facebook, and those types of social media things that the younger folks are attracted to that are absolutely a foreign language to people like me. And so that, I think, resonates and is a better way to communicate with students. They don't respond to emails, but you and I respond to emails and phone calls. But for them, there's a quicker way. And then lastly, in instruction, we've undertaken a project for remediation reform to try and provide the remediation a student needs, rather than saying you must attend a class this big for math remediation, when in effect all they need is this much math. And the research shows that the more math remediation, or the more remediation in general, that you provide a student, the less likely they are to succeed. They only want what they need. And so Lita and her folks are redefining a remediation to provide that better service to the student. So I think, and I know this is kind of long-winded, but the response to your question, Mr. Nielsen, with regard to Pam Cox-Otter, is that we understand and we are making great progress in implementing those high-touch strategies to try and help retain students.
Is there a link to be able to get to, was that filmed? Because I think any teacher that did not have a chance to see it, and I don't know how you bleep out a couple of her opening comments, but it was R-rated for a little bit, but it was incredible, her comments and the way she brought comedy, she brought statistical data, and she brought future technology all together by swearing like a drunken sailor a couple times. It was incredible. So I didn't know if there was any link that we could get to that to be able to show that.
Well, see, herein lies exemplifies the difference in the age gap here, because as you may think that was an R-rated presentation, the younger folks felt that was G-rated. So, but anyway, let me check. Do we have that mark on some kind of the ability to see it again?
President Dunlap, members of the board, we have links to the materials that she used, but the actual delivery of the message was not recorded. That would have been extra. She's already been very kind to us, but we do have a library of the different tweets, the Facebook posts, and yik-yaks that have gone out about that if you want to take a look.
Yeah. Next question from Mr. Nielsen is, what's a yik-yak?
Any further questions or comments?
I do, sir. Yes. Just to elaborate on one of the things that Joe was talking about, I just wanted to mention for the record, the generosity of Jim and Missy Hightower, the owners of the local Domino's, in
Right.
support of the event
Yep.
by the wrestlers and the volleyball players. They were very generous with the pizzas and support of it last year and this year. Once again, I know that was very much appreciated. It was interesting to watch some of the people come in. You know, they were getting some school supplies, and then Pat had a bunch of boxes, and they were giving out T-shirts, and they had the pizza boxes, and there were some folks that came in and just ate food. You know, there weren't many supplies left towards the end, so it was a little bit slim pickings, but even the food was very welcome by some, so appreciate the Hightowers.
And thank you for mentioning them. Appreciate that.
Any other comments? Yes, Judy?
Mr. Chair, I wasn't sure when. I have a request of our president for a new topic. Does that come in the good of the order, or does it come now as he's reporting to us?
Well, since you brought it up, you might as well do it now.
Thank you, sir. And that was, as we finish up our summer and think about our community outreach and buildings and facilities we're using, one of the things I would suggest, if the board is comfortable with it, is asking our president to review our policies and assess a little bit about what happened. Summer Theater was not here this year for various reasons. Although when I talked to you about that, I think you explained that Summer Theater did pay in some residual debt that they had, to their credit.
Yep.
But along with not that, just that example, other examples we have, I know Art and Green is here, many other things we do with the community, how we as a board set policy with your council for covering the cost of the use of that facility versus sharing because it's a community college, and at what price do we share, was one of the questions I had. If this is one that the board feels is worth our president looking at, then I would use this moment to say, would you look at it, please?
And we'd be happy to do that, Trustee Meyer, and I'd be more than happy to ask Graydon Stanley, who's responsible for those areas, to report out at the next board meeting.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, President Dunlap. Under old business, under the agenda, we have none, but with the consent and the approval of the board, I'm going to move tab 8 up to this portion of our agenda, and tab 8 is the report by Chris Martin and Jim Coleman on the CTE facility roundtable meeting. Mr. Coleman, Mr. Martin?
Chairman and trustees, I just wanted to thank Jim Coleman for his hard work on launching the CTE program. And he has done a lot of work on laying out our costs and what our estimates should be based on where we are today, based on some good data looking at K-Tech, and really helping us get a quality facility in place. And I'm going to turn it over to him to walk through those numbers.
Thank you.
I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I didn't do it right. Maybe I did it right. I don't know. Anyway, I got involved at the request of President Dunlap and CSG, Doug Nichols and Dave Teeter to take a look at costs. And it's based on what I've been doing for the last 10 years as far as doing value analysis for public facilities, public buildings. And anyway, we had a meeting, and part of that meeting was let's figure out what do we want as quality of this facility. What we looked at is a building superstructure, which is the foundations, the walls, all the stuff that hold the roof structure, so on and so forth, at least 50 years. And most public buildings are 50 years. Mechanical systems, this is the HVAC system primarily, plumbing fixtures, plumbing piping, about a 30-year life. The electrical infrastructure, which is 30 years. Communications and data changes so rapidly in a building that we're putting a life of 5 to 7 years on that. Site paving, site work, site hardscape, 20 to 30 years. We had I call it a group estimating meeting. It was a round table of, it was invited a lot of local construction and design professionals. We had a 4-hour meeting, and we talked about the quality parameters we just talked about there. And then we talked about costs based on past projects and created an estimate of current projects. Much of that cost data, because of the people that were involved in it, was based on local commercial and industrial buildings that have been happening in the last 3 to 4 years. And a range of costs were discussed, and then we ended up with a general consensus of what the cost would be on a per square foot basis based on a 100 square foot building. So this is what we ended up with as a group consensus. We had a building construction cost of $107.60, site improvements of about $9 a square foot based on that 100 square foot building, and quite frankly, I think that was probably about $1 low because of some of the assumptions that I made, because I was the one that did that estimate. And so I think it should probably be $10 a square foot. Fixtures, furniture, and equipment, 7.5% is standard in the industry. For a CTE building, that probably will be more just because of the cost of the equipment. And we're not knowing how much equipment is going to be brought over from the existing facilities is another thing. So we just rounded it off to 7.5%. Because this is very, very early on in the process, we have a 15% project concept contingency. Design and management fees, $12.90 a square foot, which is probably about 8 to 9%. Permits and fees. So we ended up with a total project estimate of $158.27 a square foot. We went back and tried to, as a group, compare that to a known facility of something that is very similar in function and purpose, and that's the KTEC facility, which was constructed in 2012. And that project, the total project cost was $9.5 million. That was the bond issue that was passed by the 3 school districts. And then we subtracted from that the KTEC HVAC system, which was geothermal, and it was about $180,000 premium in that building to put in the geothermal system. We added in donated materials and equipment, and this is an estimate. We really don't have a real good feel for how much it is. And Ron can probably correct me on whether that was correct or not correct. And so we ended up with a 2012 adjusted project cost of $9.92 million. This is one that we debated long and hard, of project escalation of 3% per year for 4 years, going into going up, saying that this building is going to be built in 2016. And I have to tell you, in my opinion, we haven't seen the 3% escalation in costs. At least locally here. In some other markets like Seattle and Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, where there is a lot of construction going on, we've seen probably more than 3%. But locally here, it hasn't been 3%. So, take that for what it is. But we ended up with a KTEC adjusted total project cost in 2016 dollars of $11.1 million, or a cost per square foot of $197.03 a square foot. Some of the things that are unique to the CTE facility that was not included in the KTEC facility is the storage. And I don't know why I didn't put storage on there, but storage at KTEC was about 10,000 square feet. That was outdoor storage, albeit covered. Outdoor storage on concrete, on a slab of concrete. And we're thinking that the CTE facility would end up with more storage just because of the number of programs and the intensity of those programs. So we said it might be 30,000 square feet for CTE, which adds an additional $5 a square foot to the total building cost. KTEC, a lot of their students, probably 50% of their students, arrive by bus or other means than personal cars, and so it's contemplated that in the CTE facility, most of the students and all the faculty will probably arrive in an individual car, which will require more parking than what we saw at KTEC. We're thinking that it's probably an additional $1.87 a square foot on the building size for that additional student parking. Part of the deal was when K-Tech was designed is that there was going to be a cross-use agreement between the two campuses, the two buildings for parking. If K-Tech isn't fully utilizing their parking today, there's a chance that that could go down a little bit than the $1.87. So anyway, the opinion of cost that we ended up with as a group, and we batted this around for many days, many weeks, is $203.90 or $204 a square foot. That's a total project cost, all in. And so in my opinion, what we're gonna be is somewhere between the two. And that, the $160 to $200 a square foot is somewhere where you're going to be for this type of facility at this quality level. So what are the next steps? I think the next steps are based on this information. I think that the trustees can establish a budget and look at how that's going to be funded, with the understanding that there's already been a motion and a decision made as to where we're supposed to be. I think the next big step is to put out the request for proposal for a design team to help get this this building, this facility programmed, and base the building on the size and budget that you end up being. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road. You establish the budget, the design team comes in and says, okay, we think we can get this done for we can do these programs in this space and within this budget. And then the building's designed, it's bid, and then you construct it. And I think that we're to the point now where based on what I've seen, we're doing a building of 100,000 square feet at $15 million is probably not going to happen, in my opinion. It's going to be close. You can probably get pretty close to that, but so anyway, I think like I say, the next steps are establishing the budget, and then getting the design team, which will work with the administration and the faculty and the trustees, to come up with a building that fits within that budget, provides the programs within the space. We do this, I've been doing this with the state of Wyoming now for about 10 years, and state of Wyoming establishes a size, they establish a budget, the design team goes to the district and says, here's your size, here's your budget, let's put your programs, and you're not going to get everything you want. And that's the reality of it. Then we come in and slay the dragons and tell them they can't get any of it they want. No, that we take away things that probably are, not necessarily functional, and look at value in the design. So, and I think that that's probably the best process going forward. I hope that this work that we've done has been helpful and informative to the trustees and the administration, and I'd stand for any questions.
Chris, did you have anything to add to the report before we open it up for questions?
The only piece I would add is that we have the RFQ ready to publish. We're planning on releasing that tomorrow. And based on the outcome of this group, we proposed in the RFQ design, bid, build, and it will go out for a 100,000 square foot facility on approximately 10 acres of site work. And inside the RFQ, we've listed it as an estimated value of between $15 and $20 million to get us where we think we're going to be at based on the latest estimates.
Chris, I get all hung up about acronyms. So when you say RQ, I think I know what you mean, but.
Absolutely. I apologize. Request for qualification.
Thank you.
For architectural and engineering firms to submit.
Thank you. Now, are there any questions? Judy?
Thank you. This is not as much a question as at least to be sure to thank Both Ron and I were part of that meeting. Thank all the folks who volunteered their time, and Jim, now another round with our board meeting. Thank you for your expertise in sharing it. Sometimes it's hard because we don't like your answers, but it's important that we have as realistic as we can. And I think we thanked folks at the time, but thank you, Joe, for pulling those resource people together, because there were some from Spokane, I think, as well as Coeur d'Alene, trying to get the best number we could. And we found that the numbers from Spokane were a little bit higher than what we thought would be the case in Coeur d'Alene, which is good news. And I think this helps get us going, so thank you for that.
Yeah, Todd?
Chris, remind me, after the RFQ has gone out and we get the responses back, who actually prepares the RFP?
In this case, we'll actually go through the process. We'll choose the finalists through an interview process. We'll rank those, go through the finalists, and then at that point, once that's done, we will actually prepare the contract to proceed with the actual development of the design.
Thank you.
Ooh, first of all, for clarification, Mr. Coleman, you did an incredible job. I had a chance to spend those 4.5 hours with you, and have had a couple conversations since then. John Young and Dean Hagenson, two incredible resources that have the experience building buildings of this size and whatever. For clarification, it was $450,000, not $600, so it doesn't matter. It was $150,000 amongst his friends. Contingency of 15% seems high. The outside storage that you referred to in K-Tech was part of that budgetary price, so we don't need to add that arm. We counted that pad, those things as part of that. And parking, we probably have 3 times the parking we need because it's based on square footage that was there, so probably not that much of a number. I believe your number you said is somewhere in the 165,000s, right. Saying all that is, this all starts with programming. You and I have had a discussion about this. We can talk about cost per square footage, and if we just say 165 per square footage, the right number, we say that's great. Now we have to do some programming to figure out why, for the same number of students, that we're anticipating 3 times as many square feet in this particular laboratory. And if you look at these and go through these one by one, and we've had discussions with Jim Coleman and with Mr. Young and with Mr. Hagenson, all saying the same thing. Now we forget about, we just say 165 is a good number. Now we right size this for today's need and tomorrow's growth, and that we program some of the things in there that were over the top cost, which is underground storage, that made no sense, and do what we're proposing, that Jim's proposing here. And then we find out if the square feet go from the anticipated at 100,000 square feet at 165, then we're short. But we might find out it's only 90,000 square feet and we hit it right on the nose. So we can't be saying numbers like that. We anticipate this being 20 million until we actually start the program.
Absolutely, and I think the purpose of putting that in the RFQ was to make sure that we were upfront with the design teams on what the full scope of the building would be. Right. And the programming piece, that's really where their expertise is going to, I think, pay off. In looking at our programming, making sure that we have the right square footage for the right program, and making this puzzle work. But in order to get, I felt like, a quality return on the RFQ, we wanted to put out there, the plan at this moment is, we anticipate an estimated 100,000 square feet. Obviously that can give or take, just like the 15 to 20 million can give or take. But we wanted to put a range out there to be upfront with what we anticipated, at this case, our best guess of the size of the facility, knowing that that might shift. So that, I believe that's the value of having the architectural firms really do their homework.
That's exactly right.
Any other questions or comments with regard to this presentation?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Christie.
Chris and Jim, again, thank you for the volunteer work and certainly all the wonderful people in the community that have been mentioned. It is a little bit, a lot to kind of grasp, that $5 million window, because that's a big window. And so, Chris, when you talk about it going out to an RFQ, is there an understanding with, when you put that out, this is where the board said we want it to be, and so we really want you to be here.
On the 15 million.
And that $5 million going that north is not good. So what's the process for that, so they understand that?
Well, I think that's part of the conversation that we have. We will have a pre-qualification meeting. We'll be very clear that that's our directive from the board. I think part of that conversation needs to be, this is where we have the funding today, and then knowing where we're looking at square footage and our cost per square foot, making sure that we get what we need, not only for today, but also for future growth. So putting in there that this is our estimated cost. On a facility this size, I'm with you, $5 million is a big swing, but when you're looking at the overall cost of the project, we want to make sure that we get a firm that's prepared for the full scope and the size of the building.
Comment on that. That's a great quote, Rich, but if we do not say, we're not going to try to drive a number of 100,000 square feet, we picked that number out of the air because we were talking $150 a square foot would be $15 million. So that was the two numbers. You heard 15 and 100 million. If this goes down to 88,000 square feet, then we've done it for under the 15. And based on the programming numbers that we've seen and the comparison we've done, some of the places, we have twice the square footage per student than we have at K-Tech. So we have to be willing to say, is we're going to stop talking about the building as a whole. We have to talk about square footage and needs by
program.
By program, and we got to back into that to make sure that we're not overbuilding, because I don't believe we overbuilt over there, and I don't believe we underbuilt for there. There's some differences between the college and there, same curriculum. So when we talk about we don't understand, that's a high school curriculum versus this. It's the exact same teaching curriculum for both of those. So a programmer will come in there and say, what do we need for square footage? Jim has done many of these, and he'll look at it and say, it looks like it's overbuilt in square footage needs here. We start shrinking, we do that, and we get to a number that says it's going to be 88,600. We do it for 14,800,000. We're done. We're in budget. We have the program. We have future growth. So we have to be really careful that when we send out this RFQ or RFP to do this, that we start with the program to make sure that, because the numbers that we've seen are a little bit out of whack.
Joe?
While we discuss the programming versus the square foot, and we can disagree on whether the curriculum is identical or not, what is different that I think the board and everyone needs to bear in mind is that the number of students and the capacity that we agreed to serve in a 7 to 8 hour per day curriculum is far different than 20 students that are out there for 2 hours a day. And so that, from a programmatic sense, will make a big difference in the facilities.
Any other comment?
Yeah, a response to that, Joe, I agree with you, but we have to be careful that we just only look at the differences and talk about hours and times and students. A welding lab has 37 stalls here, it has 28 stalls here. That's all relative to there, and we can talk about how it's still the number of students that you can put in these stalls. So I'm guessing if we just go look at it purely as a program, what our needs are, forget about some of the numbers that were put there, and we back into this, we're going to find out that we're going to be able to take some square footage out of here by classroom and be able to do this. We don't need a 60,000 square foot student union building like we were proposing out there before. Didn't make any sense then, it doesn't make any sense now. So let's get it down to where we can have what we need.
Yeah, Joe?
And that's the value of going out with the RFQ and asking an engineering firm to come in and do their work without us predetermining what that's going to be.
No question.
Okay, Christie?
Just a question, I guess, for Chris, Jim, Judy, Ron, any of you, Joe. What's the next step as far as the committee? Are you going to meet again? Is there more to discuss? What's the committee doing?
You have a...
Yeah, in terms of the formation of that committee, it has served a specific purpose. However, once we hire an engineering and architectural firm to come in and do the design process, then part of the process will be for that firm to have a conversation with the trustees, pick their brains on their thoughts in terms of what ought to be included or not included in that project as well. And so I don't think we'll reconstitute that exact committee again, but we will certainly utilize Judy and, Trustee Meyer and Trustee Nielsen in that process because the board appointed them to be the liaisons.
Okay, thank you.
And to expand on that a bit, I think we've discovered, as we did this first round, there are other community members that may join us at different times, Joe, with expertise in certain areas, and then thanks they've shared. I wanted to be sure also that you, and surely you know this, but I think it's part of our board charge to you, is looking at, with K-Tech, since that's where we are, any cross-use, any sequence of 7 to 8 hours a day doesn't use the building as many hours as it's available. And so, and that's always a difficulty I know in our classes now. Folks want to have class between 10 and 2, and we need to be sure this facility is being used far more than that. And that's a dilemma because sometimes the students don't want to come. So now we need to figure out how we market that, and that's what Mark's going to do with great wizardry, no doubt. But once we invest in this kind of facility, it should be used as many hours as we can creatively figure out ways to do it. Like I said, I think you already know that, but I think as a board, that's clearly one of our charges to you for not only the parking cross use, but if there are enough welding booths there to get us started, and your students, K-Tech's not using them after 4 in the afternoon, maybe we can from 5 till 10 at night, whatever it takes.
And Mr. Browning is a monthly attendant of the board meetings for K-Tech, and the K-Tech board unanimously approved the motion to move forward with having a representative from North Idaho College here. They recognize the importance of bringing these two career and technical education campuses, even though the one's a high school, one's there. They've approved unanimously to go forward with having representation on that board so that we can talk about cross-utilization, sharing of faculty members, and the things that are important that we do to make sure that we ensure that we get the maximum out of that facility. So,
Christie?
Follow up on that, Ron. I'm glad to hear that they are wanting to move that direction. I think that's a wonderful thing for us. And so how soon can we make that happen? Because my recommendation is that is a board level. Mark has enough on his plate. And plus, it also puts him in a difficult position to be on a board with you when you're this board. You need an equal.
There's no equal.
And so, although Mark would do a great job, I would like to see that be a trustee. So when can we make that happen?
Trustee Wood, we talked about that, and some of the concerns is that a trustee is not a permanent person there. So we've had some dialogue going on there, and I think they're going to look to our college to come back with a recommendation who would be that person, because Mark has been going, he's so charismatic, and he gives us incredible flamboyant report every week, every month. They want him to.
He's confusing you with Graydon.
I'm just having a go at you. I didn't know you were listening. So, so I think that we can make a recommendation. They are willing to accept anybody that we have that would come there, that would go back and deliver and bring information to there. It's a well active board, so not as formal as this. So and we get free lunch, so it's a pretty good place to head out. And cookies, right, Mark? And
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up to that, my comment, I suspect, is I would hope that the K-Tech board, when they finally reach the point of voting on having a North Idaho College representative as a voting member of the board, we've been sort of a ad hoc, non-voting member since the beginning, but now becoming a voting member, that they would leave that to NIC to select the representatives as you have suggested, because as I understand the makeup of that board, besides the manufacturers or business representatives, the school district representatives are largely administrative representatives and not board members from the different school districts. And so it would seem that that would be a choice that we should make here at this level rather than making that choice at the K-Tech level.
And Ken, you're right, is that they want us to put up as NIC who we want to represent there. They will automatically become a voting member, and the discussion was, is currently we have 5. We have 3 school superintendents and 2 private sector people on the board. We're going to go to 6, and we just made the decision. We could put a 7th on there to break the tie, but they just says we'll take that on and deal with a tie as a vote of no confidence or whatever. So they're willing to just grow it to accommodate NIC's recommendation.
So, any other questions of these gentlemen with regard to the report that they gave us this evening? Yes. Right.
My question is to Mr. Coleman. Is there somebody that you have worked with, Jim, that you would highly recommend for the programming for this, that somebody that maybe will come in and look at what's been on the ground and what we've done with K-Tech, what we've recommended in our first passes when we started at $65 million project and then down to 35 million, now we're at 15. I would love to see us stay in that 15, but I think it's going to be driven by program. Who was your programming expert or somebody that you would recommend, like a Corey Trapp that helped us with K-Tech?
Well, I think it's probably, I would like to say that there's several people in the area that are qualified to do that, and there's some very good architectural engineering firms out there that can do it too, and so I don't want to sway the decision. I think you need to look at the RFPs and see the experience that the people have had, talk to their references. I highly recommend that anytime you get involved in this selection process, especially for this facility, that you need to talk to the references that they give you. And I've been writing proposals to do these projects for almost 40 years, and so the one thing that I always do is that I always put projects down there, and I give people the names and numbers of those projects, the people who are involved in those projects. Call them and talk to them. Not just the references, but the people that call the project managers of those projects and talk to them, because you'll get a pretty good idea about their performance. I think that's my best advice. I can't really recommend. I've worked with a lot of very good ones. So I think just you need to feel like you're comfortable with whoever you're going with.
Thank you, Jim.
Judy?
And thanks, Jim. I would endorse what you're saying there for our staff to do that due diligence. It's not just the first level of reference, it's the next level down to tell us not only how the building was built, but now how it operates. Does it really work the way we all thought it would? And I think, Ron, you identified that the geothermal system didn't work as well as you had hoped. We can learn from that, and there must be other places we can learn as well. I think it's also important as part of the committee membership makeup. It was clear when we set up that committee that anybody who participated was not in any way disqualified from participating in the next rounds. And I think as a public meeting, it's important we make that option available to anybody in this community or, heck, worldwide, who wants to come help us build the best building we can.
Great point.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, thank you very much for the report. And Chris, you might as well stay up there, because the next item on the agenda is the appointment of the clerk of the election. And you've been nominated as to be appointed as the clerk of the election, and we need a motion from the board. You want to look at tab 1, there's...
Okay, thank you.
Just some background on that. I'm requesting a nomination to fill the vacancy left by Ron Dorn as the clerk of the election for the district.
Well, and then,
Mr. Chair, you want to tell us what the clerk of the election is going to do here as we have it in front of us, but also as a public meeting?
In our case, it is a little bit of a bureaucracy in this particular instance.
Welcome to Idaho, Chris.
We actually, as the clerk of the election, I post the vacancies, collect the declarations of candidacy, and we'll work with the Kootenai County clerk of the election to certify the election after the vote.
You ready to make a motion?
I would make a motion that Chris be the person of election for this and fill the open vacants by Ron Dorn.
So as I understand the motion, it's that the board appoint Vice President Chris Martin as the North Idaho College District Clerk of the election for the upcoming Board of Trustees election. Is there a second to that?
Meyer, second it.
Any discussion? Yes?
I would like to discuss the fact that this election is one that at one time, when I first came on the board, was a separate election from the general election. Right now, it is in fact, and it was an effort at the time we moved it from I think it was an August or September election, and nobody ever voted, because nobody ever kept track of it, because it's North Idaho in the summer. But it was an effort by our board at that time to say we want to be as visible as we can be when we have an election, and so it should occur during the general election of November 4th of this year. It's always a mixed message because sometimes it gets lost in all the other things that are going on in the election, but I think it was a genuine effort, and it's still the case. So that what we're talking about here is two spots on our board that are available, or up for election, and that we won't do any electioneering tonight, but we need to alert folks that that's now coming along, and I think the filing date,
Second.
does it say it here? Okay, it's September 2nd, so by the time this gets out in the world, it'll be really close, plus it's a day after Labor Day. So I just think it's part of our responsibility to help the community realize some neat opportunities coming up.
Any other discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item is a request that that the board make to the NIC Foundation to participate in the capital campaign. President Dunlap, did you want to present that? Is there further
Sure.
discussion on it? Or?
Well, the intent is to formally ask the NIC Foundation to assist in augmenting the capital reserve fund that we have. The current scheme to fund the CTE facility will use virtually all of those resources that may include a tax anticipation note at the end of that. And so there's a need, from my perspective, for the foundation to begin a capital campaign. And typically, a capital campaign takes from 18 months to 24 months. And when you look at the timeline for our CTE facility, the longer we wait to formally ask the foundation to begin planning the fundraising, the further down the road we are going to be, and the tighter and more difficult it may be to provide full funding without leaving any reserves in our fund. And so what I would propose is that we formally ask the NIC Foundation to raise money for our CTE facility and to augment our capital reserve fund that would include grant funding and public donations through a capital campaign, so a multi-pronged approach, if you will. And the amount that I think that we should ask them to raise through those grant funds and public donations would be $5 million.
Any comment or discussion on that?
Well, I think Joe's right on, is we have this reserve that we've been building and building and building, and as Joe's pointed out, that if the square footage comes in at less and we still able to hold it at this $160 square, we're still gonna be somewhere right at that $15 million. And so our goal would be is that we passed a motion to build a building out on site, and this is anticipated square footage, but it still does not take care of the reserve. And even if we were to say we'll tap this thing down, we still have a one-year window before the payoff goes that we're $1 million short. And so then at that point, we have to go after a tax anticipation note, which is gonna take some other. So I would clearly support this, Joe, because I think this is a great opportunity for our community to come together for a capital campaign that includes not just the new CTE campus, but also that starts to address the next project that we would talk, which is a joint use facility, and be able to build our fund balance that sits into our reserve today. So I would be the first one to recommend that.
Okay, Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess it goes without saying how fortunate we are to have a foundation that will work on behalf of North Idaho College, and long, long history in this community and community members. We saw some of them the other night and how long they've been on that board, so we know we're incredibly fortunate. And asking them to undertake something like this is no small matter. It's going to be a huge campaign. Rael can speak to that. She's been involved in that before. It's going to be also a wonderful opportunity for people to devote their hard-earned dollars toward educational facilities. I do have a question about, I guess, the semantics of it. So if we ask the foundation to raise, so let's say $5 million, and hopefully that's a wonderful thing, we do, we would then again, that would free up some of our money in a capital reserve so we could focus on joint use. So we're not asking them raise $5 million to spend specifically on, make it a $20 million facility. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. This is really just to help augment what NIC is having to come up with for this project. Is that correct?
Trustee Wood, that's absolutely correct. And I think that by doing it this way, it provides us the maximum amount of flexibility, because then resources could be devoted to the CTE facility if necessary. Resources can be put back into the capital reserve fund as needed, and then we position ourselves for that next project. And so I think by doing this and asking for grant funding as well as public funding, public donation funding, we have the greatest amount of flexibility in our longer-term goals.
Well, I think that's a fantastic plan, and I'm, again, so appreciative that the foundation would take on that sort of a campaign. We do have limited resources, and we certainly have a lot of facilities needs, and so I'm in full support. Thank you.
Any other comments? Judy, we need for somebody to make a motion if we're going to take action on this.
The motion is that we direct NIC administration to formally request that the NIC Foundation initiate a capital campaign specifically to raise the additional funds that are projected to help to assure that we don't fall short on the CTE campus, but also to augment the NIC capital reserve that we're going to need for future growth. And as Mr. Dunlap says, is a $5 million, but I think that if they get started shooting for 5 and they whatever that number is, we just would like to see a capital campaign started today. And we all know Rael Anderson will enjoy the new project of taking on a project which only have to raise $5 million, and then next month we'll give her something else to do. So
Can you shorten that motion?
That was a long motion. I'm gonna
sorry.
Poor Ken stopped writing about it.
Yeah, stop it to augment the NIC Capital Reserve Fund.
Let me see if I can restate the motion,
Okay.
and if I move too far off the mark, we can correct it. The motion, I think, is that the NIC Board directs the NIC Administration to formally request the NIC Foundation to initiate a capital campaign specifically to raise additional funds for projected CTE and joint use facilities in the amount of $5 million.
Or more.
Well, actually, the discussion, Mr. Chair, was about the capital reserve fund. So are we making it that specific?
The only reason I mentioned it, CTE and joint use facility, I think the foundation needs to have some kind of a project that they can go forward to the community and say, this is what the money is for. To the extent that they're able to raise money for those two projects, that relieves us of having to take money out of the accounts that we have pledged to pay the $15 million. So I'm just trying to afford the foundation a target for their fundraising.
perfect sense.
But, Mr. Chairman, we want to make sure that this funding goes into the NIC Capital Reserve Fund, so we know specifically it's for capital projects.
Yeah, actually, it goes specifically for the CTE and the joint use facility, according to this. Now, we can change this wording, and it relieves us from having to take money out of the capital reserve fund that has been previously pledged to that. The only reason, again, I'm suggesting that we give the foundation a target is if we went to the foundation and said, we want you to raise money to go into our capital reserve fund, they might have a rough time selling that to the public because it's too nonspecific. If we give them two targeted programs that are presently on our menu, one has already been authorized and one is, we're looking for approval in the next legislative session, that gives them the opportunity to present to the public specific programs. And to the extent they're able to raise that money, we use it for those programs and reserve any money from the capital account. We have to remind ourselves that when we approved this project of $15 million, we projected out that we'd only have about 12 million by the end of 2016. And then we said we could dip into our reserves to the extent of $2 million. And then that wasn't enough, so we suggested that if we needed another million at the end, we'd go for a anticipated revenue bond. And so what we're doing is by directing these funds to this project, we're preserving the need to go into those funds to the extent that we're able to raise the money.
Mr. Chair, I think that's a perfect explanation. Somehow if we could weave that explanation into the motion so that we all understand the two projects and the directive that it would lessen the amount taken from the capital reserve fund.
Okay. Todd, did you have a question?
Comment. I'm just digesting the first several comments and then what Christy just said. I'm gonna disagree with you on that side slightly. I think Ken's right in two ways. One is we want to be targeted in the giving. I think people are more generous if they have a pet project or something where it's very targeted. Some people may be really in support of the CTE, some may be in the joint use facility. That might be more motivational to them to be generous than just the generic capital reserve fund. So I want to say that I support that position I think that Ken has. And I understand what you guys are talking about, and Christy, what you just said. Although I guess I asked the question, maybe I'm not disagreeing, but do we need to convolute the motion to that extent? I think we just identify that there's a number that's a target, and there's a couple programs in specific that it's in support of. And the reality is they're going to hand us a check, hopefully at the end, and we're going to deposit it, and it's kind of mixed funds anyway. So I don't know if it really matters.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, were you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Well, then I have a idea on a motion that might accomplish.
Well, there's no second yet to the motion that was projected, so if you want to make another motion, you're entitled to do that.
Well, I can't remember Ron's long motion.
Stop at the word Rail Anderson, that's where I should have stopped, so.
No pressure.
The NIC Board directs the NIC administration to formally request the NIC Foundation initiate a capital campaign specifically to raise additional funds for CTE facilities and joint use projects and to augment the NIC Capital Reserve Fund. Does
That's a
that
nice
accomplish
revision
that?
on the deal right
In the
there, yeah.
amount of $5 million.
In the amount of $5 million.
So you just took the requested board action, made a couple little changes. That's not bad.
Yeah. Again, we don't have a second yet on this, so is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? My only hesitation is, and to augment the NIC Capital Reserve Fund. If I was a member of the citizenry intent upon making some kind of contribution, I'd want to know where it's going if I'm doing it too. And that leaves it open-ended. And really, if you leave off to augment the NIC Capital Reserve Fund, we are doing the same thing. Because if this project, if this CTE project was totally funded by contributions through the foundation to the tune of $15 million, we wouldn't have to pull money out of our capital reserve fund. So to the extent that there is money that is donated or collected by way of grants that we're going to apply for, that means we don't have to pull it out of the capital reserve fund. But the people that are making donations know that their donations are being directed directly at the CTE facility and/or the joint use facility. And that's the reason why I think that extra language could cause difficulty in the fundraising for the foundation.
Well, I don't want to do that. Okay, Judy?
Judy?
And Chairman Howard, you've identified the place where I have heartburn, because we, as a board, agreed that we wanted to do the CTE building, that we had figured out most of the funding, that we need to be real clear that we're trying to meet it within the 15 million. And so I want to be sure that we've done our own housekeeping on understanding what we've signed up to do already before we even ask the foundation. And the foundation has the right to say, thanks, no, we're not interested in this. And we need to remember that as well. Not that they have, but in terms of a capital campaign and the marketing of it, I think it's much easier for folks to identify their favorite place. I think for the CTE building, we also have an opportunity for some of the businesses that will benefit from these programs to share equipment, to share resources, however they can do that. So that's why, to augment our capital reserve fund, sounds like the foundation is supposed to fill in where we couldn't budget properly. And it just doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
Could we have an update on the joint use building? We're talking about it here, but I think in our foundation we learn more, but could our president update us on the legs that it's getting?
I would like to do that, but I'd like to conclude this motion, and then we can go ahead and get an update on that, if you don't mind.
Mr.
I don't want to get spun off track here. Yes.
Quick comment. You have a good point, Judy, about that, and I think this goes back a little bit to what Christy said, is that we're not going to try to add 5 million onto the 15 and get to 20 million. So that's the thing we're assuring the people, that we're not expanding, and you're right, it's not just augmenting and we couldn't get there and we're throwing more money at this thing. This is to cover it and then retain some of our reserve fund for the other projects. And that's why, having cited the second project, the joint use facility, I think that speaks to that.
Mr. Chair, I hear you wanting to say, it feels to me like before we can ask our foundation to support the joint facility, we need an update on, is it real? It's been around for 7 years?
Yeah.
10 years?
I'm happy to do that. I'm afraid we get sidetracked with all these inquiries and we don't get done what we need to do.
Do we need to do we need to take action tonight if we want to have more discussion?
Well, we need to put the board on.
We don't have to,
get
but
it
I think
moving, though.
President Dunlap's comment and suggestion to us was that the foundation does need as much lead time as possible to engage in a capital campaign. It takes time to get geared up for it and that sort of thing. And he's requesting that we move forward with this tonight. If the sentiment of the board is that we don't want to move forward with it tonight, you can table it.
Well, it's
Because
not
there's a
gonna-
motion pending with a second right now, and we can table it if you don't want to move forward.
Can we call for a vote?
Yeah, you can call
Still
the
have
question,
some
yes.
discussion.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut.
Go ahead.
Oh,
You didn't call the question, did you?
I just wanted to have some more discussion.
No, go ahead, Christie, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Todd. Well, I certainly don't want to give an impression that we don't want to ask the foundation to help us. Again, we're so grateful. But I tend to agree with Judy that shouldn't we know specifically what we want to ask them to do and give them as much help as possible in that regard and support from the board? And so we know about CTE, but we don't really know about joint use and the status of the joint use. And so I don't know if it would make a huge difference to have some more time to digest this and go to them with a more polished presentation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the administration is going to make the presentation to the foundation. And so, yes, going to the foundation with a presentation is something that we need to do, and we need to supply as much information as possible. But I think maybe part of it is we make the presentation, we make the request, we see what questions they have, we try and meet those questions. So this is an ongoing process, and I think what we're doing now is simply authorizing the administration to go forward with the request and continue to support it with information as needed.
Mr. Chair? Yes. I think that it is an iterative process, as you just discussed. I think we are simply just trying to let these guys inform the board of inform the foundation of our desire for them to commence a capital campaign. Christie, I'm hearing your concerns, but it's an implied backfill of the capital reserve anyway. So to be truthful, I don't think we need a lot of specifics at this time on the joint use facility. We're trying to put money in reserve for that. And so the key is that we get the CTE facility done. And what this is doing is just giving us a buffer. And again, why we're not even really mentioning the capital reserve, it just means money we're not pulling out of the capital reserve, so we'll still have that available. So again, I might be a little premature that we have to be much more specific on the joint use facility. I mean, to be truthful, I think this is going to be carried, the day is going to be carried for the contributions based on CTE. I think that's going to get most of folks pretty revved up anyway, because they know that that's happening right now. That's a real deal. It's been voted. It's been done. It's going to happen. So people see it, you know, and it's easy to, when you got KTEC sitting out there, you go, it's going to be right there, and we're going to do it. And I think, so I don't know that we have to be too worried about how much we have on that joint use facility yet.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Well, I certainly don't want to come across as argumentative. I am
Oh,
in
no,
full support of talking to the foundation and so grateful to them. So I would certainly, whatever the pleasure is of the entire board, I am in support.
Well, we have a motion right now and a second, and we need to vote on it. The motion, however, includes that language and to augment the capital reserve fund.
I would be willing to
remove that?
amend my motion and remove that.
Okay, and the second?
Second.
Okay. So the motion would now read, the NIC Board directs the NIC Administration to formally request the NIC Foundation initiate a capital campaign specifically to raise additional funds in the amount of $5 million for projected CTE and joint use facility capital projects. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
It passes. Did you vote?
Yeah, I did.
No, I was just
Aye.
uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
Joint
It
use.
passes. So the administration is authorized to request of the NIC Foundation assistance in the amount of $5 million for those two projects. Do you have a question?
I do, Mr. Chair. Based on the earlier comments, do you want me to report out on the joint use facility, or would you want me to do that at a later date?
No, I think there's some interest in it right now, and there's been a recent development, and let's just talk about, this is an amendment to your president's report.
So my time starts over
That's right,
again?
yeah.
10 minutes? No.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting that included representatives from NIC, U of I, Lewis Clark State College, LCDC, and Kootenai Health. And the intent was to try and discuss the scope of the project and the fact that we are taking that project before the Permanent Building Advisory Committee on the 7th of October. And all three institutions have agreed to make that their number one capital request to the state for this next fiscal year. And when we go down to meet with the Permanent Fund Advisory Committee, or Permanent Building Fund Advisory Committee, each of the institutions, as well as Kootenai Health and LCDC, have agreed to send representatives to make a joint presentation to that entity. In addition, Mark has met with Senator Tibbetts, as well as Tim Mason, who is responsible for that permanent building fund. And so we feel that this year is the most optimistic window we have for that particular project. And we envision the project being of approximately 45,000 square feet that would be primarily classroom and office space and a joint use student services space on the first floor that would serve all three institutions. By having that facility, it frees up space in the Myers Health Science Building so that we can bring more healthcare-related programs into that facility, and hence the interest by Kootenai Health in the project. And so we have asked LCDC to provide a level of funding. We have requested funding from the we will be requesting funding from the state. And then the three institutions collectively had agreed previously to provide $2 million. And that's not each, that's collectively $2 million towards the project. And we envision this project being approximately a $12 million project. So that's where we are. Mark Browning is chairing the group or the committee of those 5 organizations to develop the scope, the description, and some renderings of what this facility could look like, so that when we do go down to the permanent fund building, or the permanent building fund committee, that we will have common materials, a common message, and then the 3 presidents will advocate for that project. So that's where we are with that particular project.
Did you have a question, Todd?
Joe, do we have excuse me, President Dunlap, do we have an idea or tentative commitment from the Kootenai Health folks?
We have a commitment, but we don't have a dollar amount commitment.
Okay.
And so that's something that we are working on. One of the ideas was that they may also be able to provide us some excess space in the new facilities they're building in terms of lab space and training space in lieu of maybe a cash donation. So that piece is yet to be determined. But one of the things that is of keen interest to Kootenai Health is having a large auditorium, and I think this relates to being part of the Mayo Clinic network and being able to bring in doctors from all over North Idaho, as well as other areas, to do professional development training for those doctors. And so if they are interested in that type of a facility, then they certainly may be willing to provide some monetary support for that as well. So that's kind of where we are.
Is the feeling then that by presenting this collaborative effort and bringing dollars to the table from several sources, trying to do our share, that state would be more receptive and be able to help us with the remainder?
Absolutely. Typically, organizations go to the Permanent Building Fund and ask for money, but they don't bring anything to the table. And we would be bringing a significant amount of funding to the table, and it represents a very strong collaboration between 5 separate entities. And so in Mark's conversations with the individuals down in Boise, they believe that this is a very, very strong proposal. And it's probably the best and maybe last opportunity we have.
Judy?
Just to compliment administration on that effectiveness, that's clearly what I've seen over the years, both as a state board member and Mark in those times, and with our JFAC folks if we visit with them. I think we have a chance to be the poster child for partnering and effective community effort as a community college with lots of different agencies. And we're not limited yet. If we can find others, we'll welcome them to the party as well. But I commend you for that. My negative vote on the last motion was because I feel like we have the cart before the horse. We hadn't heard this before we voted on it. And that's uncomfortable for me because I think we need to see what the foundation is comfortable with. And it may be an either or. And that's okay too. I think wherever the foundation feels like they can gain the support and the campaign kind of counsel that we get usually to help us do that will help us read the community. Because I want to feel like we've done our due diligence on figuring out how to fund the CTE on its own. And it's hard, and we may not get there, but I've been uncomfortable with asking the foundation to fill that in, when now it looks like we clearly have another whole project ahead of us, which is one that's almost as long as CTE been needed, and I think has some real exciting opportunities to share in the community. So I would hope each month we'll hear more about the joint use building, because October 7th was your next.
That's the Permanent Building Fund presentation. And then after that, we would be making a presentation to JFAC as well. There's one other component I want to add that makes this that potentially makes this an incredibly strong proposal. Christy Doyle and Sarah Flayland have put together another Department of Labor grant for healthcare programs. It's a $6.4 million grant. It would be the largest grant that this college has ever received. It develops a career ladder system in healthcare for the state of Idaho, and we will know sometime mid-September the outcome of that. And so if we are fortunate enough to receive that grant, we will be able to go to that October 7th meeting and say, oh, by the way, we're bringing this to the table as well. Now, that doesn't come with any bricks and mortar funds, but it comes with programming funds.
Christie?
Well, Joe, that's a wonderful report, and the joint use certainly is got some legs behind it, and so that's exciting. Because of that, I would like to propose to the board that we formally reinstitute that committee that we once had in place dealing with the higher education corridor and the joint use. Now, informally, it looks like you've got a lot of those
Right.
players in place.
Yep.
Interesting how they're not the same people.
Right.
That were from the positions are the same, but the people have all changed. In that formal committee, we had representation, I believe, from the city. We had the mayor of the city of Coeur d'Alene, possibly the mayor of Post Falls. We also had a board liaison that worked with the president and did attend those meetings, and when one couldn't make it, the other one did. So I'd like to suggest to this board that we formally bless that committee and appoint a board liaison.
Let me ask a question just by way of procedure, Christie. Would it be okay with you if we just authorized, without a motion, authorized the administration to establish such a committee so that they can report back to us? I mean, that really would be part of the administration's normal procedure, which would be to establish a committee like that and then report back to us, rather than having us create the committee. So if we can achieve that by just telling the administration that's the way they need to proceed forward. I don't know if you're comfortable with that. Todd?
Question, and Christie, as you're envisioning this, one of the other things that's been on the table, and we've made a concerted effort to go down and visit with the folks at the Coeur d'Alene Tribe. We've had them up here for a tour and hosted them over at Emery's and that. And one of the things we talked about was we've watched the evolution of maybe a longhouse to maybe a cultural center that maybe could host the folks in the basement, whether it be the tribal folks and the veterans, and there's some things there. And I know we talked about maybe having a person on each board as kind of a point of contact, but I know that with summer and everything, we haven't gained any traction there yet. But is that another project that should be under the scope of this too while we're looking at it? Because that would fit in with, kind of the master plan at that point.
Yeah, well, I certainly would agree with that. Mr. Chair, to answer your question, the reason I suggest that the board direct this formally is so that we could name a liaison to that committee. Now's as good a time as any. Obviously, President Dunlap is the overseer of the committee and runs the meetings, but I do think that we should have a board liaison. When we now know joint use is starting to move along. It will be another large project similar to CTE, similar to, oh my gosh, so many projects where we've had board liaisons, and so that was my suggestion that we.
I'm sure President Dunlap would put a trustee on there.
I'd be more than happy to put a trustee on there.
Well, really, I think the board should probably decide between.
Who it is?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, make a motion.
No,
She'll come back to
we can just come back and revisit that.
But it reminded me again that we haven't yet identified, I'm not sure in the poster child committee that we have of folks coming together to help with joint use. We talked with the tribe, and I'm sure that would be on your list now that we've suggested it, if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And you'll think of other folks, and maybe we will too. The dilemma is not having an unwieldy committee. On the other hand, the partnerships are what we're all about in community. So I think the board is happy to hear from the president each month on what's happening, who's meeting. On our calendar of upcoming events, it does not identify in November that the newly elected legislative folk will be touring here or in northern Idaho, and I believe on our campus at some point. And I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity while all those new legislators are here, and old-timers, to be sure to tell our story again. Would we as a board have a chance, or should we be trying to meet with them while they're here to tell our story?
I'm sure that we'll be notified of it, so we have an opportunity to meet. These are matters, I think, that can be handled on matters for the good of the order. We're really getting off of the agenda quite a ways. I'd like to get back on the agenda if I could. Please remember these things that you would like to have.
That's the hard part.
We're thinking of it now, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
that we're
please
older,
remember them,
getting older.
and when we have comments for the
Okay.
good of the order, bring them up so we can address them. Tab 3 is the next agenda item. It's first reading on revised employment policies. Laura Hill is going to make a presentation on that.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, trustees, and President Dunlap. I think we just have the 4 policies for a first reading. Do you have any questions?
Right, thank you. That, we have had an opportunity to review them, and so rather than having you read them or go over them in any length, let me just address to the board, do you have any questions or comments with regard to the first reading on the employment policies revised procedure?
Mr. Chair, if I may. 2 things. You're going to have to speak up just a little bit. You got such a wee voice. Secondly, if there's anything of true significance that you'd like to point out to us, please feel free to do so. I mean, I've glanced at it, but it's not my area of expertise. You're an HR person. It makes more sense to you. If there's something that you think is significant, would you please point that out to us? If it's all pretty mundane, just administrative.
The 3 of the 4 policies are just updated to make some wording changes and to make them reflect the current processes. The policy 3.02.05, employment of relatives, has been modified the most of the 4 policies, and that's just to broaden the scope of that from just current relatives working here to anybody who lives in your home. So it can be reflective of other people who live in your home being considered as family members, which may or may not cause problems within a work environment if we have a reporting structure where people report together. So it's just expanded that scope.
Any other comments or questions with regard to the revised employment policies? Okay, since this is a first reading, if there are no questions on that, we'll move on, and that'll be on the, the agenda for our next meeting as a second reading. Next is tab 4, revised instructional policies. Lita Burns. This again is a first reading.
Good evening. Like Laura, I just stand before you for questions, if there's any questions on the policies being presented for this first reading.
Are there any questions or comments with regard to the instructional policies? Judy?
As Todd just asked, anything you want to be sure to highlight to us as significant changes that are changing the course of the ship here?
Chairman, I would respond by saying there is not, particularly on the grading policy, it's just basically cleaning up that policy and wording. On the tenure policy, the most significant change was to further define the membership and then put term limits on the membership. Other than that, it was making sure that the deans get included in all the entire process and just, again, cleaning up wording.
Any other questions or comments on the first reading of the revised instructional policies? Okay, thank you, Lita. Those are accepted as the first reading of the revised instructional policies, and they'll be put on the next agenda for an action item. Tab number 5 is the first reading for revised administrative policies. Mark Browning. Mark?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'd be happy to stand for any questions, as I'm sure you've read the material and are familiar. So if you need any explanation, I'd be happy to offer.
Ron?
And this is regarding the request for a leave of absence for the use of campaigning for public office. Why, I mean, most people that run for public office do that and maintain their job. Why do we want to give somebody a leave of absence to be able to do that? I've never heard of this before.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Trustee Nielsen, primarily this changes language, which previously the policy has been in place that if an employee wanted to run for public office and take the option of doing so during normal time, that they would request a leave of absence of the board if they wanted to take time outside over and above, say, vacation time that they had coming if they wanted to do that. What this does is put into alignment of what your current structure is, which is the Board of Trustees only has one employee, and that is your president. Everyone else who is staff or faculty reports through various mechanisms and structures that ultimately end up at the president. So if that person is coming to the board, you are usurping that chain of command, and it puts you at odds with your own structure. So it simply has provided an option for folks that, should they choose to exercise that opportunity to take some time away to campaign, that there is a mechanism for them to do that over and above any vacation time they might have.
I understand that this is some wording that just takes the responsibility and the reporting to go to the Board of Trustees for approval, and it moves it to the president where it should be. But I'm going back to the policy as a whole, is where it's saying is that our president would grant a leave of absence for somebody to go campaign for public office. And my question was, I don't know anybody that gave up their job and went on a leave of absence to campaign. So and especially under this, it's inviting us, especially without any oversight, if we accept this. So that's my question.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Nielsen, I think if, certainly with some of the positions that we're most familiar with, if a person wanted to run for one of the trustee positions, or a city council, or even a legislative position within their own district, those would probably be efforts that could be done in their off hours. However, if a person was of the mindset that they wanted to run for something, let's say a congressional seat that takes a significant amount of time, or a statewide seat, they wanted to run for superintendent of public instruction, for instance, they would then probably be in a situation where they would need to take a leave. But as a full-time employee, would probably be looking for a leave of absence so that they would have a position to come back to, that position could be protected.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to revisit this and say, is this really the will of the trustees? Is number one is to keep this as written, but all of a sudden to switch the responsibility of the president to make that decision, because I'm not sure, there's got to be some situations where we would have to make a decision. If you, Mr. Browning, decides that you want to go and you want to leave absence to run, and maybe that this college cannot function without a person in your position while you're doing this, and leaves us hanging for the year of campaigning. So I've never seen a policy like this, so I would like to have some further discussions before it goes to a vote next time.
Hang on just a minute. Let me just describe what I think the procedure would be here. This is a first reading. It's not an action item. And so on the next meeting, it would be an action item. Our options as a board would be to reject it, in which event we would reject the changes. We could make a motion at that time to revise the policy to remove that language completely from the existing policy. So I think what we need to do is be prepared at the next meeting to decide, do we want to remove it as a provision? Do we want to accept the change? Because those seem to be the options. These are presentations made by the administration and the college, having gone through the vetting process from the faculty and the administration. But it's our job ultimately to accept or reject them. And if you want to reject part of it, then we need to, I think, have some language to reject that part specifically.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? How many times, to our knowledge, has this policy been exercised?
I don't know.
Anybody?
Probably, if nobody knows, it probably hasn't happened very often.
So, which concerns me is the language that we move that consideration from the Board of Trustees, where there might be some political ramification, that over to the president. So if this is just a first reading, I'd like to have some discussions further about that.
Right. The only thing I'm suggesting is that the second reading would be an action item, so we need to be prepared, I think, at that time to substitute language for anything that we find, or any of the board members may find that they object to. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would just remind you that if there is a change in language, that would have to then come back through the entire process and go back before College Senate and Staff Assembly as well as the administration for approval. So we would essentially start over, not that you don't have the provision to do so, but that it wouldn't automatically go into effect upon your vote at that point. It would have to come back through the process.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the rule again, but I think the rule indicates that the board may accept or reject changes. And if they reject them, then there would be no change. It would go back to the existing status.
I think it's very similar to what the administrative rule process is in the legislature, is that there is not wordsmithing. It's either an exception, or it's either accepting or rejection of the rule. So any wordsmithing then would have to start over in the process.
Well, let me ask my question, which we're actually going to be two questions, because that may partly drive this. I see this policy. My question is there a complementary policy or something that goes with it that says, and or if someone gets elected, how we deal with that? Because I know, like, Michelle Lippert's a Democratic candidate for state rep over here in Post Falls, I think. So what happens if she gets elected, and then she's got to be down there for January, February, and March while it's in session? So how do you deal with that? Is there a companion policy to that, or do we need to deal with both those? Because I see a leave of absence for campaigning, but what happens when we lose our teacher out of our classroom for 3 months? And then that would be on a continuous basis, at least for 2 years, and pending if there's a re-election. And to me, then that would be a problem at that point. Maybe that teacher needs to step away.
Mr. Chairman and trustees, there are provisions within the existing HR guidelines that deal with extended leaves of absence for various reasons, whether it's a personal reason, they've taken a public service position. There are already processes in place under the regular HR guidelines that deal all with that. So this is simply a change in the policy that directs the burden of reviewing each of these to the appropriate party, which is the president, as the lone employee of the Board of Trustees, where, if you want to boil it down, we work for the president, not the board. That's how the chain of command works. And so this brings the language into alignment.
Mr. Chair.
Christie.
Thank you. Mark, I appreciate your explanation, but you certainly would understand the hesitancy of the board to ever remove any of our authority from policies. And so we are going to have to give this some serious thought. As far as chain of command, I think we all understand chain of command, but there are other things that the board approves, such as the sabbatical leaves. Those have to be approved by us. And so we just get a little bit, when we see that our authority is being removed, we tend to perk up with that. That's what that's about.
Judy, did you have a comment?
I would see it as the opposite. Our authority is over our president, and if we don't agree with his administration of whatever it is, we work with the president. And I'm thinking in our own company, if somebody wants to take time off, it's done within the company. It's not comparable because we don't have a board, but that our leadership in the company says we can either fill in or have to figure it out in hopes that you're successful in whatever community service you want to do, whether it's chairman of a campaign for a fundraising for something. So what I understand, Ron, for you, and Christie, it sounds like you as well, the heartburn is the fact that having the president make that decision is not comfortable for the board?
I don't know.
I think that.
Okay, good, then that's fine.
Has nothing to do, I want Joe to make all the decisions and be responsible as the CEO of this organization. There's nothing that I want to take away from his ability to do that, so don't misunderstand that. But when you have a board of trustees that are responsible for relationships with the community, we're talking about running for public office, we're talking about a specific task within there where you've changed the language. This particular one, on the rest of these where it drives back through the CEO, I have no problem with that. But when I'm with Christie that says that at this point, when you're talking about leaving, vacating your job, doing that so they go run for a public office, there's going to be some implications for that regarding running for a public office and the endorsement by the school and all that type of stuff. So I go back to where it is. I think we need to have some discussions there, and it isn't to undermine the leadership and the authority of Joe. Don't read into that. That was never said that. I referred to the public office and running for that. So.
Thank you, because that helps me understand the board's thinking. if someone wanted a leave of absence to run to direct the marathon and operations for 6 months, some other community activity, is it public office that's the hard part for our board versus other community activities that need full-time attention for a while?
Yeah, I don't know. And my suggestion is that in this discussion that we've had sort of instructs us that when it comes up for a vote next time, that we all pay attention to it before we get to the meeting. And if there is revised language that you want to propose, so that we can sort of focus on something specific in terms of resolving the questions that have been raised here tonight. They've been good questions and a good discussion, but we need to look at a specific resolution to the proposed amendment. And we can do that through accepting the amendment, rejecting the amendment, and potentially even having another motion to change the policy. And so we need to be prepared to do that the next meeting.
So the word was public office was the issue. About that then.
This was written 6 years ago. We haven't used it once, so I don't think it's a pressing issue that we have to make a decision right now, so.
Other than the discussions we've had already, any other questions on administrative? Yes. Todd.
Sorry, I'm still back on this policy for 10 seconds. If the answer to my question was that everything else is being dealt with under HR, then I guess I have a question then that says, why do we even have this? Either this should all be consistent under the HR and the policies are there for leave of absences or whatever, or I should have a policy for leave of absence for this and a companion policy if it's this or that. I mean, there's a certain point where I'm not sure why this one's excluded or unique and called out on its own. If either it's handled under HR like everything else, because to be truthful, the leave of absence to do a little bit of campaigning doesn't faze me nearly as much because most of that's going to be over the summer months anyway. So maybe they're not teaching in the summer term, I don't know. But if you're in the legislature, you're January, February, and March, and you just killed the second semester, the spring semester. So to me, that's way more. I'd rather see a policy on that. That's way more of concern to me. Did I miss that? Do you see where I'm going with that, Mark?
Mr. Chairman and Trustee Banducci, I would just tell you this. At some point, many years ago, the representatives of the college and the trustees at the time felt that this needed to be in policy. That's all I can tell you. I cannot speak to the intent. I wasn't here at that time. Maybe they felt that there was a reason that this needed to be set aside and addressed specifically.
Can you hazard an opinion to that? Laura, can you hazard an opinion? Is there a reason why we need this separated out from an HR perspective or from,
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Well, and yours is a good question, but I would,
Sorry,
again,
we
like.
just can get rid of it.
Well, I would like to reserve this to the time that we address it as to whether we pass it or don't pass
Okay,
it.
sorry.
And whether there are alternatives. And this is a good discussion, and these elements ought to be included in that discussion and any other resolutions that might be proposed. So unless there's some further discussion on the revised administrative policies, we'll move on as there haven't been presented as a first reading, and they'll be presented at the next meeting for action item.
Mr. Chair, were there any questions on the revisions to 3.04.10? Retention, or I'm sorry, 2.01.06, retention of records. Are there any questions? Hearing none? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you got off easy, actually.
Our next our next agenda item is a question on invoking prayer at board meetings. And Trustee Banducci, would you kind of give us a brief discussion of what you have in mind? You propose this, and then in order to discuss it, we're going to need a motion and a second.
Yes, sir. Thank you. One of the things that's commonplace at meetings, Coeur d'Alene City Council is just one example, is that when you begin a meeting, a lot of times you'll start with an invocation. Follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance. It's fairly common practice. So my proposal is simply that we invoke a prayer or an invocation, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning of our meetings, and that would precede the Pledge of Allegiance. And that's it.
And would you give me that specifically again so I know what the wording of the motion is?
I make a motion that we invoke an invocation at the beginning of our meetings just prior to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm going to second this motion, not because I'm going to support this motion. I'm second this motion because I think under the sensitivity of this, I believe that we need to give the board a chance to discuss this in open, because we don't want to just reject something like this and then just say we didn't get the support. So I would like to second the motion to open it up for discussion, and then I have a comment.
So we got a second in the motion, and the motion is to invoke an invocation? Is that what you said, invoke an invocation?
Invoke a prayer, however you want to do it.
Well,
I think they're technically about the same thing.
yeah. So that
Say
we,
invocation, that might be.
that we adopt an invocation, would that be all right? At the beginning of the meeting before the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So saying that, sir, now we have a first and a second, that I am a man of faith, and I do believe in prayer, but I'm very concerned about the implication of doing that, we clearly have a well-defined separation, and that I believe that prayer is a very important and powerful tool. I use that every single day, but I think that we are inviting people to come forward and challenge that, and then we open it up for everybody that's there. My faith and my prayer is personal, and that's why I wanted to make sure I just did not support Mr. Banducci's request, but I wanted a chance to have a discussion.
Any other comments? We have a discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Christie?
I think, I certainly agree with Ron that, first of all, Todd, I think your intentions are pure. I do.
Well, we've talked about it, yeah, you know.
But I tend to agree with Ron that this is a very personal subject, and we do invite quite a bit of controversy that's not necessary, and maybe even some grief for certain individuals, maybe our students on campus that are from many different religious faiths that feel that they're not being represented. And I just don't want to seek that kind of discomfort for people. I certainly support your efforts because they do come from a good heart. But I have to agree with Ron that I just don't know that this is the place to do that.
And a follow-up to Mr. Chairman is when Mr. Matheson offers the opening prayer at graduation time, and he does it in his native language and the spirit that he does it, it's very well received, and I think it's a moving experience. I just wouldn't want to make a mockery out of that where the people that are in question and then challenge that, and then everybody weighs in on what is considered prayer, and then we have this maybe something that we don't want to see doing so.
Judy?
Community college is clearly part of the state, not necessarily enough money, but we still want to be part of the state. So for me, separation of church and state is so profound that as a community college, then we need to welcome all flavors. And so I would leave it open for people to do as they wish, but not in an official fashion in our board meetings.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may, just a couple, three things. One is it can be as simple as praying for wisdom. Secondly, the Supreme Court has recently affirmed that prayer is not a problem. Most municipalities pray. City of Coeur d'Alene has prayer. The government has prayer. We have a Senate chaplain at the federal level, and we also do at the state level. So the separation of church and state is a fallacy. It's not even in the Federalist Papers where they try to quote it and they take it out of context. So I do want to say that this wall does not exist. Unfortunately, it's misused. However, I understand your concerns, but I would go back to even to Trustee Wood, as we have visited. That's why she kind of knows where I'm coming from on this. I look at the city of Coeur d'Alene, and for all the dysfunction that city has had in their city council and their deliberations over the last 8 years, for example, they've still successfully pulled off the prayer before the meetings, and I've yet to have noted a controversy in the Coeur d'Alene press, and I suspect that I would have read it on the front page had there been one. So I think we may be making a mountain out of a molehill. It's a simple thing, but maybe it seems simple to me. I'm a simple man maybe in that. So I just put it out there that there's a lot of precedent for it. It's an endorsed, in God we trust on our coins, e pluribus unum. You know, we have all the stuff, and it's institutionalized, Supreme Court, 10 Commandments. So again, we don't have to separate church from state. Our state endorses religion. It's just the question of doing it in an equal fashion. So I leave it there.
Any other comments? I do have a comment. The concept of prayer or an invocation is one I think that is utilized to try and promote and advance some wisdom, some guidance, some thoughtful considerations. We give different names to it: benedictions, prayers, invocations. But we are a institution of higher learning, and by our very mission, we serve diverse educational needs. I think that if we start down the road of having an invocation at the beginning of our meetings, we need to address a broader policy issue of making sure that we are all-inclusive when we do that. And that would mean offering all faiths, all value systems and non-faiths the opportunity to make a presentation or an invocation or a prayer in their own way. We must offer equal opportunities to anyone who feels that they need to come forward and present their belief, their faith, their understanding in some kind of a wisdom or guidance or thoughtful consideration. I think that that opens the door to the Aryans coming in, asking for an opportunity, the Ku Klux Klan, atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Muslims, and we have to be ready to offer the opportunity, indeed, to seek out representatives from different groups in order to make sure that we have diverse presentations. And quite frankly, I'm not willing to go down that road. I think that in presenting representing the college and representing the students and the faculty and the staff, and making sure that we present it in a diverse educational nature, that I think we can do that without engaging in some kind of a prayer schedule or a prayer policy or proceeding. And what's going to happen if we set the policy that says that we're going to invoke this, then we have to start setting guidance on the presentations, because you've referenced the Supreme Court decision recently, but the Supreme Court didn't just blithely say that there is no separation of church and state, or that you could offer public prayers in public meetings or private prayers in public meetings. The issue there was whether or not there was simply some kind of a statement that was non-denominational and was not proselytizing or wasn't advocating a specific religion or a specific teaching. And so we'd have to start setting rules on what are the guidelines for people that come in and what can they say and what can't they say in order to be able to stay within our guidelines. So while the idea, I think, publicly is a good one, that we adopt concepts that are espoused by our religions, I think we can do that without adopting prayer in our presentation here. And I can see difficulties down the road in terms of our administering that and making sure that it stays within guidelines that are appropriate for this institution. Any other comments? Or all right, we have a second. We have a motion and we have a second. All in favor of the motion? And the motion is to adopt invocation at the beginning of the meeting before the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
No. Okay, it fails. The next item on the agenda is tab 6, NIC's annual employee training program. Laura? And Aaron?
Good evening, Chairman Howard, board members, Dr. Dunlap. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk to you today about professional development for faculty and staff and the opportunities that we currently provide and will be providing over the next year. There's a theme to this slideshow, so. All right, those of you who don't know me, it's been a while since I've been in front of you. I'm Erin Norvell. I'm the Employment and Training Coordinator for Human Resources, and I'm around all day long. I work with employment recruiting and employee training, and occasionally I am also Wonder Woman. So if you come by our office during the Halloween time period, you will find us dressed up. The superhero theme is making our employees superheroes through professional development. The issue with developing our employees, it's nothing new. Data, research, everything tells us that institutions, organizations, corporations get the most out of their employees when they invest in them. The mission of the college says North Idaho College meets the diverse educational needs of students, employers, and the Northern Idaho communities it serves through a dedication to student success, educational excellence, community engagement, lifelong learning. To us, this means that if employers and students come to us and they need education to develop themselves, we offer it. North Idaho College is one of the top largest employers in Kootenai County and indeed North Idaho, and we don't have a comprehensive training program for our employees. That's a big issue. We offer these services, yet we hire people with certain competencies, and then we just say, well, go forth. But we need to continue to develop them so the services we then can provide out to serve our mission can meet the standards. The reasons that we will develop our employees is to increase their skills, knowledge, and abilities. That's kind of a no-brainer. Out of training and development, employees get more job satisfaction. It increases employee morale, employee motivation, and employee loyalty. And by doing those things, we get efficiencies in our processes and our services. We become better, faster, and more efficient. We get the capacity to adopt new technologies and methods. We increase innovations in our strategies and programs, and we increase organizational engagement. If any of you are familiar with employee engagement, engagement levels in the United States, about 70% of all employees are not engaged in their work, which means they are not doing their top job. They're not doing what we need them to do. You increase engagement, you increase services, you increase productivity, and you do better. So for our superhero employees, we want them to keep their skills current and on the cutting edge. We want them to strive for innovations in their programs and services. Pam Cox-Otto, who has been mentioned several times from our convocation meeting, kept telling us it's not going to get easier. Our jobs will not get easier with all the things that are happening, reduction in funding, increases in students. We have to work harder and better. We have to innovate, and for a lot of us, that means we go back to school. With employees, you tend to have two types of employees when it comes to development. You have go-getters, the people who are going to voluntarily go out and find that conference, find that class, pay for their own development because that's what they want to do and they recognize the need. And then you have the what-you-gots, people who are totally up for development. They will participate, but they're going to be slightly more passive in their approach. So what we can offer them to do, they will absolutely participate in and take it and run with it. And that's what we're trying to address here. We want to help them find their cape through the professional development options we provide. Currently, North Idaho College graciously provides us with funding assistance. As employees, we get access to professional improvement plan funds, which is for both faculty and staff. They're two separate programs, but they're accessible to both groups. And the Professional Development Fund, which is a new fund in the last 2 years, which is a single pot fund that staff and faculty submit applications to, and it's a competitive process. Our 4 vice presidents review the applications and then award money. And they essentially rank those applications on how well the professional development activities meets our strategic plan, meets our mission, and the NIC's need for that activity. So we want to get more bang for our buck by vetting what folks do before we give them money to do it. And then we have this new program, the NIC Edge, which I'm going to spend just a little time on with you right now. Chairman Howard mentioned the acronym sometimes can be a problem, so we are sure to include the words here. The North Idaho College Employee Development and Growth Education Program, NIC EDGE, is the acronym we've chosen for it. You heard Michael Hurswell talk earlier about getting the edge through sabbaticals. That's what we're doing. We're giving our employees an edge in the job that they're doing. This program is going to begin in September, and it's going to have a year-round calendar. We have several courses already planned from September through June available to faculty and staff. Any faculty and staff member can come to them. Both college-directed and self-directed courses will be included. College-directed is our new term for what has previously been known as mandatory. These are the things that we need our employees to do for compliance reasons and for keeping general skill levels up. And then we have our self-directed sessions where employees can self-select into these sessions based on their interest levels. We have both face-to-face and online courses will be available. For our full-time employees, currently we'll be tracking it through our learning management system called Greenlight. Greenlight we've had for about 1.5 years, and we've been utilizing it to track participation in training. Our goal is to be able to similarly track our part-time employees, hopefully in the future. That does have a cost associated with it to get additional licenses, so we are working on that. It is competency-based. This program is all directed towards organizational performance. We'll have organizational effectiveness, professional excellence, communication, customer service, inclusivity, and leadership and supervision as our 6 prongs of this program. Each of our trainings should be slotted into at least one of them. Most of them cross over several. So we're trying to hit all the hot button topics in our strategic plan and our mission, vision, and values. And so coming up, just so you're aware, and you all are all invited to attend these as well, if you'd like to drop in on any of these courses. We're going to have some live sessions on maximizing performance appraisals geared towards management and supervisors. On the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, which is a compliance topic. Title IX and anti-harassment, which is also very, very present compliance topic right now. Advising faculty, time management, dealing with difficult people, avoiding bad emails, the art of customer service, and working through differing work styles and managing difficult employees. Those are just some of the topics that we're offering as our face-to-face. Our e-courses, which are our online courses, run the gamut. We have software courses, we have start and stop project management courses. These are all things that came to us through Greenlight, and our employees can access them at no cost to the departments. We are fortunate to have an outside facilitator coming for one of our first sessions on September 24th called An Introduction to Story Metrics, How to Get the Answers to Your Most Important Questions. Martin Klubeck comes to us from Notre Dame, and this is funded through a grant from the foundation and through our Office of Institutional Effectiveness. How to ask the right questions when you're looking at data so you know what information you're going to get out of it. And he'll be here on September 24th in this room if you'd care to stop by and see it. It's an afternoon session. So looking towards the future, this year it's all in-house programming. The Human Resources Office is staffing most of these sessions. We have the Registrar's Office participating, advising us participating as well, trying to keep as much as possible in-house because the staff is there, the faculty is there, the people who are the experts are here. And it's going to be doable, and I think it's going to be a great program. But I believe that we will start seeing interest in this, and the more interest you have, and the more people who continue to offer sessions, we're going to run out of topics pretty soon that will be of interest. And we may have to start bringing in outside facilitators. So that's a cost that we'll be looking at in the future and trying to vet a little bit. So additional future costs could be internal staffing costs. Currently in HR, we have one person dedicated to training coordination, and that's myself, and it's actually a third of my job. So I have about 30% of my time that I can devote right now to training coordination. We're trying to juggle some stuff around so it frees up some more time. But in the future, if this program grows, that would be a possible cost we'd need to look at, would be increasing that. Outside facilitator costs, we have great resources in this community, not only in Coeur d'Alene with our business community, but if we broaden it even out to just the higher education institutions, we have access to all sorts of experts for higher ed specific things. Good many of those people would probably come to us for free, but some other ones might want a little something, $300 here for their trouble to leave their job and come see us. So those costs could come up in the future. Again, not this year, but in the future. And software licensing costs. Everything is electronic these days. Tracking employees, training is also electronic. Right now we have enough licenses for our full-time employees, and we have some funding for some of our part-time employees. So as we look at budgets in the future, that might be something that the HR budget tries to cover as well. Those are just some of our considerations. But again, this year we're doing it all in-house. So we want our employees to look for a telephone booth by keeping their skills current, increasing their engagement in their work, and cultivating as much innovation as we can get from their brains. And we're going to hopefully do that through this program and continuing to bolster our funding programs and get people out there and learning as much as they can so we can offer the best services to our constituents. And with that, I would field any questions.
Aaron, thank you very much for that. Questions, Ron?
My question would be, is there a model that you're following on this, a successful model at another educational institution?
You know, we've looked at quite a bit. The primary model, I would say, if there's a primary one, it's conglomeration a lot. The University of Idaho has a good structured program that has that aspect of college-directed courses and self-initiated courses. They actually have it in their policy. They have their professional development policy addresses their program as a policy-driven program. And they've been doing that program in its current form for several years. They also do a specific development day for staff during the year as well, so that's built in as well. So that's where they get a good chunk of their programming done, is on the single staff development day. The University of Florida, it's a much larger school, but their program was exquisitely laid out in terms of a competency-based program. And so that was one that was really one of the first ones that just jumped out at me as being a good way to lay it out. They've got cohort groups they work with now. They've been doing it for years and years. I'm not saying we could get that far, but the competency-based programs seem to be the most successful because you can tie your trainings back to those competencies which ideally line up with your mission, vision, and values.
Yes.
Follow up to that. So if you have a couple of active models that are proven success, is there a chance that you could tie into them and say, we want to become a sister educational institution? We'd like you to send the curriculum and the guideline, and we have some of the finest teachers in the country working here. So once a facilitator goes through the process, they can teach. So is there some ways to keep, first of all, as you say, run it for a year at no cost, find out a way to minimize the cost, and then at that point, maybe we're in a position to have some funding to help with that cost and take it in from a step-by-step process.
That's an actually excellent idea, and I have found that the University of Idaho staff, since that's one program that I've looked at, they've been more than helpful on any number of other things, and they don't keep anything close to their chest. Everything we've asked for, they've provided us information on. So I would make I believe, good faith assumption that they would be more than happy to help us out with that. I've not addressed that with them, but I would be happy to do so.
Very nice.
Another question? Judy?
The only thing now will be your challenge to find a telephone booth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did see some last weekend when I was traveling around up by Priest Lake. There's one or two left up there.
Any other questions or comments from Aaron? Thank you very much, Aaron. Our next agenda item is Community College Survey of Student Engagement. Graydon Stanley. 10 minutes, Graydon.
I don't know why you'd remind me of that, Mr. Chairman. Board President Dunlap and other guests, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and talk to you about the acronym CCSSE, known as the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. In fact, the real expert is here to my left, and that's Kylene Lloyd, who's a student data analyst, and she's been responsible for the administration of this survey on our campus for the past 2 years. So here in just a second, I'm going to ask her to take you through some of the highlights. You have in front of you excerpts of key findings from the CCSSE. I want to share with you that this survey has been used at a community college located in Twin Falls, Idaho. I often forget the name and can't recall it tonight. And has been used there for a number of years. 2 years ago, CWI chose to use it as well. And we were pleased about that because all three community colleges had the same instrument that we could show comparisons with. CWI chose not to do it this past year. Unfortunately, CSI continues, but there are a huge number of community colleges across the nation that do utilize this instrument. In fact, Vice President Martin was just telling me that we know that this came out of Texas. He reminded me of that and his roots there and how much it's utilized in that state. So it's been a great tool for us. I want to offer our thanks to the folks who help with the administration, not only Kylene with the lead of it, but instruction, faculty, because in fact it's administered in the classroom. So we asked for some time within the classes themselves, that captured audience, to be able to administer this survey. So the kind of participation we get to make it a valid survey is well done that way. We utilize this to drive changes. You're going to hear some of the results from it from Kylene in just a second, to drive some changes in our processes, our services that we provide to students. You've heard earlier some of the projects referred to, one of them as the Village Project, where there are best practices that are utilized by a number of institutions in other places to help students come to school, stay in school, complete school, and graduate. And these are some of those practices were driven from result of the community college student survey of engagement. Probably one of the greatest findings that we had, and I think Kylene will reflect a bit upon, is that oftentimes there's a disconnect between students saying that they value, and in the student services area we particularly saw this, they value a particular service like advising and say it's really important, and when they've utilized it, it's been very helpful. The disconnect is the next question: how often do you use it? And they don't often use it. So for us, it drives some changes, like sometimes not allowing that to be an option for you to use an advisor. Instead, we might put holds. We might drive students to those services that they value, that we know that are effective, that if we leave it to their own to access those, they often won't. So sometimes we have to not allow them that choice. Those are some of the best practices that we're seeing through the Village Project. So I'm proud of the work Kylene's done, appreciate the work of the rest of the campus, and she'll take you through some of the rest of this.
Kylene, since Graydon used up your 10 minutes, we're going to start the clock all over again.
Thank you. When we go through this presentation, keep in mind the survey takes students about 50 minutes, so you are going to get the very abbreviated version of it tonight. The portion of it that you got in your packets is just the key highlights. If you're interested in going into the individual questions and how students answered those, I can provide that to you as well. So, the survey tool is basically out there to help us in a multitude of different ways to see what students' feelings are about things. This is based on students' interpretations of what's happening or what their experience was. So sometimes when we look at some of the answers to some of these questions, we have to kind of interpret that, and I'll show you that as we get further along. It's administered during the spring semester. It takes up an entire class period. Over 70 instructors participated. And over 800 students took the survey. So it's a tremendous amount of work for everyone involved. The faculty chairs all organize who's going to, you can't have the faculty administer their own survey. Other individuals come in and administer the survey. So it's quite a bit of time that everyone puts in. But we use it to, like Graydon said, make decisions on campus. It also is used in our accreditation process as well. So, going forth, and a lot of this is in more detail in the key findings report that I put in your board packet. But there's 5 things that the survey focuses on. Active and collaborative learning, because we see that students are retained at a higher level, pass their classes at a higher level if they're active learners, and if that's the way that they feel like they're learning in their classes. Now again, that's their perception. I would say that some instructors would say there's more collaborative learning going on in the classroom than the student would say, or vice versa. So we always have to keep that in mind. Student effort is another area. Academic challenge and the creativity of the work is the third area. The student and faculty interaction, and then support for learners, which is basically student services, advising, student health, our student activities. All of that is considered the support for learners area of the questionnaire. Okay, so these are the key areas, the 5 key areas, and this is when the students take this, all of the questions, and we'll go a little further down, you'll see the survey tool kind of assigns them to an area that they're weighted in. And so you can see where we score. That first line is us, the maroon color. The next one is the entire cohort of schools. Nearly 1,000 community colleges participate in this survey tool. And then the blue line is the top performers for 2014. And top performers are defined as colleges that report the highest retention and graduation rates to IPEDS, which is a national reporting institute for us. So that's what we're comparing ourselves against. Now, in the first 4 areas on there, you can see, and hopefully it's a little clearer in your printout than it is, I apologize, up here. We're pretty close to average. We're a little bit lower, but really we're very close there to the 50% mark across the board. The area where we see that we're the lowest is in support for learners. And I'll show you a little bit of the questions as to why we're at the lowest point there, but Graydon brought up a good point. Most of that is because the students find it very valuable, but they're not using it. They're not using it at the level that they do at other community colleges. So they're not going to see their advisor. They're not seeking out employment counseling at a high of a level as they would at some other community colleges. So there's been lots of discussion about how to drive students to use those resources. Okay, so these probably are much clearer in your binder. And let me tell you what page they're actually on so you can easily find it. I believe you're on page 4 or 5 with this one. Let me look here. Anyway, these are the first areas which we consider to be the areas where we scored the highest, page 4. And you can see how the questions are worded here and how they're assigned to different areas: the student effort, the active and collaborative learning, the academic challenge, and the student effort. So those are the areas where we found that we scored the best. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to go through and read all these, so you can probably you'll probably want to go back and read through it in your actual binder. But when you go and look at it, then you can see where we scored as compared to the cohort, to the national cohort. So and I'll just go back there and just look at the first one. Worked on paper or project requiring integrating ideas and information from various sources. And so that's talking about the active learning in the classroom, and that's where we're about 3% above the national average on that. So, and those are some of the highlights. The survey does a good job of highlighting what we're doing well. Now next we can see things that we need to improve upon. And you'll see 4 of those 5 are support for learners. And even that 5th one, student effort, there's other questions around that weighted to support for learners because they don't actually use our computer labs at as high of a level as they do at some of the other schools. So those are the areas where you can see they don't seek out career counseling as much, and we don't know if it's because they don't understand the value of it or they just don't know it's there. And you can see where we rank there compared to the national levels. Now I'm just going to highlight just a few here of things that are interesting that go because we know how we've directly affected this or not affected this on campus. And this first one is to describe your orientation process here on campus. Now this is an area of, before we implemented ORS, where none of our students were required to go through an orientation process, or very few, probably just select groups. But now nearly all of our students, new students, go through an ORS process. Now up there we see that only 54.3% of our students say that they go to ORS, or to an orientation. So we need to realize that we probably need to do a better job of identifying to students exactly what ORS is to them. Because even though that ranks well above the national average, we still have to look and see, okay, this is how students are interpreting it. Some of them are interpreting that they're going to an online orientation, or to an online or to a ground orientation, while others are saying they're not. And we know a higher percentage of the students are actually going than are marking that they're going on this. So those are the kind of things where we kind of have to educate students on what they're doing, you know, and why they're there. Another one where we're kind of addressing an issue is when you look at this one. During my first term in college, I enrolled in organized learning communities. We don't require hardly any of our students to do that. You can see that the national average, most community colleges don't do it, but we're even above the national average in terms of not doing that. Nationally, we know that collaborative learning in learning communities, cohorts, works really well, and so that's where Graydon was talking about starting out the Village Project and things like that to address those issues, because that's one of the areas where the CCSSE
survey tool has pointed out, when students are involved in those kind of learning environments, they're more successful. So that's why they highlighted that in our key findings as well. But we're on par with the national average. It's just that, you know, that's an area that we've chosen to work on. Okay, so that is a very, very, very abbreviated version of the survey. Graydon and Lita can probably talk more than anyone to how we're addressing the different areas. There's also a student faculty survey that we're going to do every 2 to 3 years. We only started using the survey tool last year, so we used it once last year, and then we'll probably follow up this next year or the year following. It really depends on what we decide our needs are there. We had a training this summer that was an all-day training for faculty chairs and directors and managers within student services to come and get a first look at these results and start looking at how they can use them and how they can access it and actually run their own individual reports within the system to really isolate areas that affect them. So, any questions?
Ron?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by graphs and comparisons and best practices and all this. And as you look at this, of course, you can't help but it comes out pretty clear where we need some attention. And when you see a simple graph like the one you pointed out that says we rate above in attending these orientations, but we do very well there, but we could do better if we made them aware that they were taking place. So when you have all these graphs and this information, is there an action plan that says that we're not satisfied being average, we want to be above average? And what are some of the local institutions? I mean, if there's other colleges there, which are the ones that score on the high end of this, and what is their procedure and what is their system to be able to engage these kids early or these students early and to have them do what they need to do to score high on all those, and then we put up a plan to do that? I mean, do we have a system in place now?
I'll address what the other colleges are doing, then I'll let you address the here. CSI has done this for almost a decade. CWI just did it the 1 year. They're kind of still working out how their institutional research is going to go. I think they're going to come back to doing this eventually. But they'll tell you the average school needs to start using the survey for 5 years before they'll see any institutional change. It takes a very long time to see the change. CSI is a good example. They use it primarily for their accreditation. They do use it to enact some change. It's a very long process. They give us a list of schools that have succeeded in changing. Every year, one of the reports you get is the most change, where they've identified key factors. And so those are areas where we can really look and see what individual schools across the nation, ones that we don't have really any relationship with, and see what changes they're making. And that's really, we're doing those exact things with the cohorted learning and the intrusive advising of students. Those are two of the hot button issues and two of the things that the schools that are moving the needle the most are actively involved with. So, and I'll let you talk about that.
Sure, thank you. Thanks very much, Kylene. Thanks for your question, Trustee Nielsen, too. I think one of the things that Kylene mentioned that I think is really important to note is oftentimes it's a case of students not understanding the language when they're asked the question. So, for example, when we talked about the orientation issue, we're the only institution, only community college in the state that has mandatory orientation for all incoming degree-seeking students. The other two community colleges don't do that, and we think it's highly successful that way. Practices that we have as a part of the Village Project, and the intent is moving those to 500 students. We started out with 75 this year, and then up to 500 students by the end of the program, is to then move that campus-wide. So when we talk about cohorting of students, when we talk about intrusive advising, when we talk about early warning, all those things that help students be successful, those are being piloted through these projects. They're intended to go institution-wide at the end of the Albertson project, which is essentially 2 years down the road. So I think we're touching on all those best practices that come up with the best results, and we'll be implementing those over the next 2 to 3 years. Plus, it'll become a language that our students are more familiar with, and they'll answer according to, they've been utilizing those services all the time, but they just didn't know it by that name.
Other questions, Judy?
Tell us again why College of Western Idaho tried it for a year and then went away.
You know, I think what they would tell you most of all is they didn't like it was administered by paper and pencil in the class, so students were actually given a hard copy and answering it there, and faculty objected to utilizing instructional time, and so they were looking for an electronic instrument to use that wouldn't be utilized in the classroom. And I think CSI shared with us that they've just been committed to it for so many years, and it's been a valuable tool. Their faculty are used to it. They expect it to come every year during this time, and so it's just become a standard part of their operations. We'd love to see CWI go back to that because as a statewide comparison, it's a valuable one for us.
Christy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's just incredible data, and I'm so glad you shared it with us. Even just a snapshot of some of it, I can see how incredibly useful it must be, especially to your division, Graydon, when you talk about student retention. And you have highlighted just about every question I could have come up with. You do a wonderful presentation, both of you, so thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I have a question. When we look on page, well, figure 7, I don't know what page number it is, on the last page of the presentation, I think. There's several graphs where the cohort didn't perform very well and we didn't perform very well. The question on figure 7 is, during my first term in college, I participated in a structured experience for new students, sometimes called a freshman seminar or first year experience. I guess my question is, if the cohort doesn't perform well and we don't perform well, who is it that decides that that particular issue is relevant or important? If we want to try and achieve something that nobody else is doing, or it's not considered relevant from a statistical or from a data gathering standpoint, then why do it? And so when I see everybody else is doing poorly, I wonder, why is it important?
Those ones are primarily identified as the most important because when you look at the top 10% of schools, they are way out of line with this cohort. And when I included this is just their highlight reel, and it probably would be more helpful if you saw the top 10%, because the top 10% there, over half of their students are participating in that. So, I mean, there's a huge jump in difference between the top schools and these few little individual areas. So it gives you a good idea of, not small things, but very specific pointed things that could be changed that really move the needle. And that's one of them. And it doesn't clearly illustrate that in this report, where the top 10% are in these 3 graphs, but they're significantly different than the overall cohort.
Just a follow-up, I suspect when I look at, though, how you define the top 10%, the top 10% is those colleges that performed in the top 10% of this cohort. So the questions sort of define who's going to perform well. Those that perform up there are going to say they're in the top 10%, and those that didn't.
Oh, it's top 10%. The cohort is huge because it's almost 1,000 community colleges nationwide, and then it takes all of their data from iPads, which is independent of this, and looks at their retention and their graduation rates, and identifies then where statistically their students are answering the questions vastly different than the average in the cohort.
So the top performing colleges are determined based upon an examination of graduation and performance rates and success rates.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for that information and that presentation. Our next agenda item is the board chair report, and all of you might notice that there is no time limit on this. So,
Here we go.
my report, though, it will be brief. Some of the trustees are planning on, are still making plans actually, to attend another ACCT conference in Chicago, October 22nd through the 25th. Those are really valuable experiences for trustees in terms of our learning and understanding our roles and trying to keep up with what's going on around the country. I don't know that all of us will be able to attend this time, but at least I think some of the trustees are thinking about it. And in that context, I'm expecting we may well have an agenda item in our September meeting to move our October meeting to accommodate those who are going to be going, because I think you're going to have to make flight plans, that sort of thing. So we may well address in the next meeting moving our October 21st meeting. There's going to be a meeting September 26th in Boise of the 3 community college presidents and chairs and other representatives from community colleges, as well as representatives from the Association of Counties, again addressing this issue of out-of-county tuition. There are 2 agenda items that are on there. One is called a certificate of residency, and the second is funding of community colleges with tuition, and long-term rewrite of antiquated statutes. Around the state, people are finally starting to, I think, to understand that we need to address the whole concept of out-of-county tuition. And the counties and the other colleges are paying more attention to it. You'll all recall that this year we created a different level of tuition for out-of-county students in order to help make up for some of the subsidizing that goes on through local property taxes. There are conditions around the state that's bringing those conditions on inequities in tuition and property tax payments to the attention of a number of different colleges. And so there's going to be a meeting finally there has been a meeting earlier with the counties, but legislators are starting getting interested in, do we have solutions? How do we describe the issues? How do we come to some resolution to this? So there's going to be a meeting, and hopefully we'll be able to report at the next board meeting on the outcome of that, and hopefully it's going to be moving forward in a positive way. I'd also like to report that we had a great opportunity to meet with the foundation. The trustees did at a dinner that was hosted by the foundation, and it was at Emery's, and it was excellent. The food was excellent. The meeting was a lot of fun, and it's one of those opportunities for the trustees to get together with members of the NIC Foundation each year. And that's all I have to report, and I would open it up for comments and remarks for the good of the order. Judy.
I'd like to segue on your comment about out-of-state tuition. I happen to be in Sandpoint with a couple of different gatherings over the last couple of months, and clearly Sandpoint appreciates what we're doing up there. That's always fun to hear. The mayor of Sandpoint said, "I don't understand why you aren't charging more tuition." I said, we'll have a way to fix that pretty soon. So clearly there's beginning to be that understanding that we have proven our value and that folks are ready to step up to it. So the good news is, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've been chasing that a while, and obviously our administration has made provided good services in Sandpoint, and good for you all to do that. My only other topic had to do with the legislative tour that you suggested I bring up at this time, because I think it is important for our efforts, particularly at joint use, to somehow, and maybe that's a next meeting time or now, because our legislative tour doesn't happen every year here, so it's this year that it comes up this way. To Coeur d'Alene, I do believe.
Mr. Chair, if you'd like,
Yes.
those plans are set for November 9, 10, and 11. November 9 is a Sunday. There will be a brunch here in this building in the dining services area downstairs for the legislators and the others who are part of that group. We'll have approximately 90 minutes here on campus, during which the presentation will be made both formally and informally. We already have support materials that are they've been through the draft stage, and they're in revision right now, that will be around the room. And then we'll have presentation from the 3 main institutions as well as part of that, during that legislative presentation there. And that will be a good opportunity to help reinforce our message that we will start with on September 9 and 10, when the Permanent Building Fund Advisory Committee tours in Lewiston and Moscow. They're not coming to Coeur d'Alene. But the North Idaho Legislative Tour only comes to North Idaho every other year, and we rotate with Lewiston, so it essentially comes to Coeur d'Alene every 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Browning.
Is there a role then for board as to what, if any, help you want, or you want us to stay away so we don't confuse it, or shall we brag a lot?
This is actually, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, it's actually a function of the North Idaho Chamber Alliance, which are the 6 northern chambers, starting with the Lewis-Clark Valley Chamber in Lewiston, ranging up to Sandpoint. It is invitation and ticket event. So what I would say is if I switch hats and put on the chamber role, I think we can certainly take a look at that. But yeah, there's some roles here. It's certainly more advantageous for us to get them while we're here than to pay for all of you to go to Boise.
Right.
Did you have something?
I'm kind of just to dovetail on what Judy was going to ask, because that was my first question. And then the second one is then, Mark, I'm going to guess in advance at some point for our scheduling purposes, you'll get us a copy of their itinerary and kind of highlight where you think we can play.
The itinerary is closed. It is under the direction of the chamber. So it's not an open invitation. They literally are on the bus with assigned seats. So it's not an event where we can just jump on and grab them by the ear. Our window to get them is here during the time when they're at a brunch. And
So Sunday the 9th at what time?
right now it looks at 10 o'clock unless the flight schedule changes. They'll be here 10 to noon.
You mentioned the bus. Could we get on the bus? No. Any other comments or, yes, Judy?
One other quick one, an article in the paper about Coeur d'Alene begins planning the corridor project. Don't know that, is there some time when you can update us from the administration point of view about some of the planning that's going on? Because I believe some of that land is right next door to us, is it not, the BLM?
All right, can we put that on the agenda for next time? An update on the Four Corners?
Mark, you're on the committee.
Mark's on the committee.
Anything we need to do between now and then? We'll wait patiently then, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Before I adjourn the meeting, each meeting I try and at least one time remind us all of the mission statement. And our mission statement is that North Idaho College meets the diverse educational needs of students, employers, and the Northern Idaho communities it serves through a commitment to student success, educational excellence, community engagement, and lifelong learning. And that's what we do. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.